Yo, what's good, Shinobi Nation? Welcome back to Just a Shinobi, the home of the craziest Naruto what-ifs. Today we're jumping into part 8 of What If Naruto Says I Am Not Going to Puberty Again. So strap in, because things are about to get explosive. If you're new to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, and share this video with your whole ninja squad. And of course, drop your theories in the comments. Your support is what keeps this shinobi grinding. It was time. Two competitors walked out into the arena, bowing to one another, giving pre-fight greetings and nods of acknowledgement. Naruto. Sasuke. In the Kage box, Raza and Haruna looked more bored than interested, most likely because the participants from their villages were out of the running. Now it was just a fight of one Konoha ninja versus another Konoha ninja. Even if one of those ninja was one of the last survivors of an ancient and noble clan, and the other was obviously the son of the fourth Hokage and slightly less obviously the of the nine-tailed demon fox, not that Raza had actually worked out that last bit, yet, it was still ultimately just a fight between Leaf Ninja. Neither the Kazekage nor the Kyuzugaku Jounin Council's representative had any particular investment in this match. Surely, they'd already seen the extent of these kids' abilities by now. Maybe they might still have one or two tricks left up their sleeves, but how much more could there really be? They were both already shoo-ins for Chunin, anyways. It didn't matter to them who, out of Naruto and Sasuke, won. Either way, it was a victory for Konoha. Big deal. The tension in the audience, on the other hand, was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Admittedly, actually trying to do so would have promptly earned one a shuriken through the eye from one of the twitchier ninja spectators, but it was still a useful metaphor. And the chakra was just as thick, between Naruto and Sasuke. Iruka was torn between swelling with pride and developing an aneurysm. Shizen was patting him on the shoulder and fighting the urge to sweat drop at the sheer levels of power radiating from the arena. Jiraiya grinned smugly, and Tsunade scoffed. Anko cackled and puffed out her chest, draping an arm over Kakashi's shoulder. Guy, on the copy ninja's other side, was wide-eyed and bushy-browed. Asuma and Kurenai, in another section of the audience, respectively puffed on a cigarette and took a draught from a flask smelling strongly of vodka. Hate Gecko and Yugao Yuzuki were not present in the stands. They'd slipped away to share some alone time at the start of the second round, and were probably snuggled up in some remote cranny right about now. The other Konoha ninja in the audience demonstrated reactions ranging from hometown pride to slight anxiety. Even civilians with zero chakra sense could feel the pressure emanating from the arena. Hell, the stadium itself was nearly starting to shake as Naruto and Sasuke presented the seals of confrontation to one another. Itachi Uchiha had his Sharingan active, and he was sitting ramrod straight in his seat. He was one of the only people here, along with the Sandaime and the time travelers themselves, and their mentors and sensei, to a lesser extent, who had any idea of just how high up the relative power scale Naruto and Sasuke really were. Him and basically just about every censorine within 10 miles of the arena. Whether the two boys had been partially erasing their presences until now, or had only just now begun to seriously imbue their chakra, the effect was truly awe-inspiring either way. Itachi was sure he could see pebbles and smaller bits of debris floating up around and between the youths as they stared off in the arena. Heihachi and family, in one of the rows in front of Itachi, were blatantly gobsmacked. Niji looked like he was close to breaking down in hysterical paroxysms, Hayashi was gaping like a goldfish, and Hanabi was perplexedly asking her father some very awkward questions about that giant, nine-tailed kitsune standing behind Naruto. Tenten, for her part, was simply perturbed by her date's behavior, and wondered what on earth Hanabi was talking about. She didn't see any darn foxes. Ginma looked ready to piss himself down in the arena, and he was frantically inching away from the two finalists. His face was chalk white. Not an ounce of killing intent was coming off those kids, and yet they were almost visibly brimming with chakra. If you squinted, you could even see a slight glow around their bodies like a human corona. Let's keep this a clean fight, okay? Ginma squeaked, standing around 15 meters, nearly 50 feet, give or take, away from the pair. Practically at the very edge of the arena. We're ninja, Sasuke said in response, onyx eyes alternately graying and a Sharingan word to life. Of course it will be a clean fight. Ginma was not the slightest bit reassured by this. Very well, he said, inching still further back, moving until his back hit the wall of the stadium. The poor referee felt acutely like an ant at the feet of giants. Begin. He swung his hand down. Sasuke and Naruto smiled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a blur of motion, a field of gleaming black that seemed to flash between the pair. It lasted less than a second, accompanied by a noise like thunder in its volume, but more akin to the clashing of a million swords in its piercing ring. In an instant, the ground between and around Naruto and Sasuke became ringed with a thick field of darts. Shuriken and kunai bristled in packed soil, bent and blunted and sundered as though they had each endured thousands of impacts over years of use. Except they had the clean, polished gleam of new metal, the shine of weapons which had not yet seen extensive use and probably never would, now, given their present shape. From an aerial view, the result of this nigh-instantaneous exchange looked rather similar to how iron filings would arrange themselves around two opposing magnets on a flat plane. Slowly, the audience parsed what had just happened. In a fraction of a second, it seemed Naruto and Sasuke had bombarded one another with enough throwing weapons to make Tenten blush, and deflected every last one of them just as quickly. Most of the darts had to have clashed in midair, shuriken intercepting shuriken, kunai glancing off of kunai. Neither of the combatants had a single scratch on them. Genma gaped. In the audience as well, many spectators were astounded by the sheer speed at which this firefight had occurred. Raza and the Kusa representative both stared, shocked out of their impatient boredom. Sasuke hummed, flipping a bent and twisted kunai in his hand. You threw them too hard, he said, smiling idly. This was one of my good knives. I could say the same to you, Sasuke. Naruto laughed and lazily tossed a similarly battered kunai into the dirt at his feet. Your shuriken was going just as fast. Speed used to be my thing, between the two of us, Sasuke replied. Back before you got all those boosts from Kurama. He drew another kunai, and this one danced with flickers of electricity. Chakra extended from his blade like a partially defective lightsaber, sparking and buzzing around the edges. He brandished it like a sword, tightening the blade and honing it into a perfectly straight and controlled edge. That was a very long time ago, Naruto said, shrugging. He drew a kunai himself, and visibly channeled chakra around the blade. Besides, you can teleport. Yes. So I can. Sasuke smirked. Suddenly, the pair of them vanished. An instant later, they reappeared, their chakra-streamed kunai clashing together. Dust was kicked up in spiral ridges at their feet, and they swung their blades in a flurry of movement. Soil and gravel were sliced up cleanly around them, fine cuts and deep gouges quickly marking the dirt. Naruto and Sasuke started changing the natures of their chakra. Wind bit into the edge of a tethered lightning bolt, and sparks erupted in a gout of flame fed by that wind, which bore back down in a crash of water threatening to consume the fire, only to break as flame cooled and became rigid earth, over which the waves washed harmlessly, only to course with lightning and smite the rock, shattering it, save for a fierce wind to sweep out from the broken earth and rebuff the thunder. So on and so forth, They cycled through the elements with each swing, strategizing on the fly like a life-or-death game of rock-paper-scissors to anticipate their opponent's next choice. And considering that both Sasuke's Sharingan and Naruto's Senjutsu granted them a kind of combat precognition, they were naturally making dozens of split-second adjustments with each swing, a game of mental cat and mouse played at a speed most ninja could only dream of. Doing this much was mere child's play for them. Neither of the combatants even felt the infinitesimal drain this continual streaming and shifting of natured chakra put on their reserves. It was mere droplets out of an ocean, nothing over which to concern themselves. Killer Bee cocked his head. Huh. You think so, Hatsun? That's a trip, he said seemingly to himself. If I couldn't feel that chakra, I'd say get a grip. Omoi, seated nearest to Bee, eyed him curiously. What are you talking about, sensei? Those boys down there are hella strong. Bee grinned. Kyubi at least, if Hatsun ain't wrong. Chuji cocked his head. Huh. What's that about Kyubi? Who's Hatsun? Samui, seated on the opposite side of Karui, quickly paled. She put two and two together with ease, and whipped her head around to stare at the two combatants in surprise. I didn't think Konoha had, she muttered. Chuji blinked. What's A? Samui, Karui, and Omoi turned to stare at him. They looked at B-sensei, then back to Chuji. They looked away. And nothing important, they lied, looking rather anxious. Puzzled, Chuji absent-mindedly took a potato chip and ate it. Crack! Naruto and Sasuke leaped back, dropping their respective kunai. Iron blades crumbled into dust, scattering on a breeze before they could touch the ground. The two fighters landed at the opposite edges of the crater which had formed at their feet, torn up by the repeated, cataclysmic clashes of the elements that had erupted from every swing of their knives. The arena grounds were already a complete mess, with fallen trees and pitted earth everywhere, and this did nothing to improve the state of the landscaping. Rocks ranging in size from pebbles to great boulders were tumbled across gouged and pockmarked soil, and a once level field was now as much slopes and crevices as flat ground. A trio of commas ringed the pupil of Sasuke's right eye. His left eye was gray with concentric circles like a layered focusing lens. Naruto had dark orange marks around his eyes, and bar-shaped pupils and golden irides. Humph, streaming chakra isn't your specialty, Sasuke observed, idly clenching his fist. Your technique is still sloppy in that area. Only in the sense that you're a little better at it than I am, Naruto said. He clasped his hands as if praying. You haven't taken advantage of the openings left by my missing arm, either. Sasuke knitted the fingers of his own hand into an esoteric configuration. And don't try to say there aren't any openings. I know there are, and I know you're good enough to take advantage of them. It's obvious, isn't it? Naruto said, rolling his eyes and smirking. You're just trying to bait me. The moment I move in to exploit that apparent opening, BM, you'll grow a mech arm and sock me in the gut. I'm not stupid. Sasuke laughed. Even after all this time, I continue to underestimate your intelligence. I'm smarter than I look. Naruto grinned. Sasuke inhaled through his nostrils, nearly imperceptible. Katon, Guka Mekyaku. He spewed a massive orb of fire, vast and ponderous. It swept through the crater and scorched the dirt, waves of heat rolling off it in an oppressive manner, nearly suffocating in their intensity. With his visual prowess, Sasuke could see Naruto spitting out a small lake's worth of water in response like it was happening in slow motion. Acting half on instinct, Sasuke jumped up into the air and formed another seal. Katon, Genka! He spat out 3 fireballs at once, and they descended like a trio of burning comets. In response, the tall waves crashed and climbed upward, arching like a raised shield over Naruto's head, the water forming into a solid dome around the blonde. It looked like a Dai Bakusui Shuha, but Sasuke wasn't completely sure. Either way, of course, the jutsu would probably suffice to nullify his 2 fire attacks. Sasuke looked at the ground behind Naruto, and he teleported behind his teammate in an instant. He raised his hand, and it sparked with electricity. But lightning would penetrate with ease. Cheeto! A fist crashed into his jaw, and Sasuke stumbled back. The attacker spun around, aiming to drive an elbow into his gut. He caught this with his hand, but his assailant twisted and flipped upside down, and a hard knee struck his shoulder. Sasuke let go and body flickered a few steps back. A shadow clone stared him down with the same sage mode eyes as its maker. Naruto's water dome steamed and rippled as the flames from Sasuke's prior jutsu washed over it. Only a couple of seconds had passed. By their usual standards, the blonde was effectively standing still. He turned around slowly inside the dome as the flames continued to gutter and fizzle. Mind you, the speed of this action would still have seemed respectable to most ninja, and terribly impressive to most civilians, but it was painstakingly slothful to Sasuke's perception. The original Naruto was far from his primary concern, however. Sasuke ducked to avoid having his head taken off by a Raisin Shuriken, then jumped over a second Raisin Shuriken, and teleported to the left to dodge a third and fourth. Shrieking detonations tore up the battlefield, Naruto's shadow clone throwing around Raisin Shuriken like they were, ordinary Shuriken. Sasuke burned a few precious seconds on the evasive, weaving and rolling and leaping and teleporting to avoid a seemingly endless barrage of randomly natured Raisin Shuriken. One scorched the earth in a hellstorm of fire, leaving behind vitrified soil like glass. Another crashed and rumbled with the sound of thunder, smiting the arena wall like Thor and Zeus playing a game of darts. The water dome collapsed. Yet another raisin shuriken exploded in a shower of lava after carving a trench halfway across the field, filling one of the larger craters up to the brim with molten rock. Even more caused everything from localized earthquakes to blizzards to screaming kamitashi on steroids. And this was still only a fraction of the elements at Naruto's disposal. Wow, and here I thought Sasuke had won the lottery with his chakra nature. Enko whistled, looking down into the arena as her apprentice dodged through a bullet hell of insanely destructive jutsu. Where would a person even get all those affinities? I know his mom didn't have half that crap, and the Yandame's parents were just fishermen. Kakashi shrugged. For sanity's sake, I've been assuming he got it from well, you know. He looked around, seeing a number of foreigners and kids in the seats around them. His furry little problem. Kurama, you mean? Said Guy. Kakashi turned his head to stare. And how do you know that name? He asked. He himself had only learned of the Kyuubi's supposed true name when Naruto told it to him after a little freak out he had the first time the boy had used his other chakra in training, and it had still taken Kakashi more than a few doses of tranquilizer to calm down from that revelation. Tenten, Guy said simply, as if this was completely normal. She heard it from Niji. And he heard it from his cousin, Hanabi, who apparently heard it from her sister Hinata, who knew it from he paused and shrugged. Well, you know. A beat. No what? Enko wondered. Kakashi's sweat dropped. Are those two really that obvious? Sasuke ducked under an acid-style raisin shuriken, and narrowly sidestepped a steam release one as well. He wasn't entirely clear on the exact distinction between the two, save that one was more gaseous while the other was more liquid. Both dissolved things, after all, so maybe it was just a matter of semantics. But he was distracted from this train of thought by another raisin shuriken, this one with unmistakable wind chakra. HN. His Sharingan blazed, and a giant skeletal arm of purple chakra came into being on his left. Phalanges locked together, bony fingers curling over the buzzsaw spokes of the 9 shadow clones' most recent attack. A shoulder sprouted from the arm's base, translucent flesh beginning to knit over ghostly bones as ribs spread out and curled around Sasuke's flank. The raisin shuriken detonated, and blades of wind tore at the arm of a storm god. It had minimal effect. Sasuke's form seemed to dance with flames for a moment, deep violet tongues flickering up from his body. Then his chakra surged, and his eyes flashed. A great, armored Tengu enveloped his form, wings spreading out, and he stood up on 2 legs like trees, towering over his opponent. Naruto's shadow clone paused in its barrage. Well, shit, it said. Looks like Sasuke's tired of dodging. Yeah. The original Naruto appeared at the clone's side, his hands clasped. I kind of figured that would happen. Enough fooling around, Naruto came Sasuke's voice from the Susanoo. It glared down at the blonde and his shadow clone. Fight seriously for once. Naruto let out an exasperated sigh. Geez, this guy, he can say what he wants, but he really is just like that ancestor of his, isn't he? In one way, at least. An arrow of black flame pierced the ground next to Naruto, narrowly missing him and his shadow clone. It devoured rock and dirt, incinerating them all in a slow but steady burn as hot as the sun. Or that's how it was classically described, at least. If you don't want to fight me for my sake, then do it for your sake, Sasuke said, his Susanoo stepping forward and making the ground tremble under its weight. It's only natural, after all, for a man to want to show off in front of his well. He trailed off. The semi-real visage of a Tengu warrior curled in a knowing smirk, mirroring the expression on its creator's face. A moment passed. Go set up a barrier, said Naruto to his clone. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles, an eye twitching. This fight's become a matter of pride, it would seem. He smirked half in spite of himself. His shadow clone nodded and formed a cross seal, splitting into 4 identical blondes. The duplicates scattered to the corners of the arena. Naruto, the original, took a deep breath as his clones clasped their hands and stood in formation, flaring their chakra. As the fiery crimson walls of a 4-red yang formation barrier joined around the battlefield and rose into the sky, Naruto slowly exhaled. Orbs of black as deep and dark as the metaphorical void manifested behind him, and his clothes became wreathed in a rune-marked, shining gild. He clutched a monk's staff in his right hand, an implement of purest ebon, and a coat of flame danced over his torso. Sasuke swung a fist down, and the austere visage of the Ninetales caught the blow on a shimmering brow, a shroud of golden chakra in the shape of Kurama's head manifesting to guard Naruto. The ground depressed into a crater at his feet, a vast bowl of cracked and crushed soil thrice as wide and twice as deep as any that had been made by Sakura or Hinata. "You want to fight, Sasuke?" Naruto grinned. "Do you?" Sasuke rejoined. In answer, the fox-head's mouth opened and spat into Susanu's face. Spectators dumbly gaped. "That's an impressive barrier jutsu," Kintsuchi hummed, seated next to Taiuya. "It reminds me a little of your. I bet it's nowhere near as strong, though." She smirked, an expression intended to share a sense of confidence with her girlfriend. Taiuya sheepishly averted her gaze. The four violet flames formation, she knew, could theoretically be performed by any four halfway competent chunin. In contrast, the four red yang formation could only be performed by Kage-level ninja. Lord Orochimaru had emphasized this point when teaching the sound for their barrier jutsu. Shiiskyujin was to Shishinjin, he said, as a tiger was to a house cat. The last time on record that the former jutsu had been performed, it had been by Lord Orochimaru himself working alongside his old master and teammates. The god of Shinobi and legendary Sannin. That was the baseline minimum level of power needed to pull that jutsu off. Yeah, Taiuya said, not meeting her girl's eyes. "Sure. But I suppose it's impressive, in its own way," Kin continued, chortling haughtily, "that these losers could perform even a much degraded form of your own jutsu." Right, Taiuya murmured. She winced and coughed into her fist, fidgeting. It's not exactly my jutsu, though it does take all four of us sound four to pull it off, after all." Kin looked at her with half-lidded eyes. "Modesty doesn't suit you, dear," she said flatly. Taiuya blushed and decided to change the topic. "What is that?" Niji deadpanned, pointing at Sasuke's Susanoo. "Looks like a giant made of chakra," said Tenten. "Well, yes. Obviously. But where did it come from?" "Wasn't your active nephew?" Hayashi said, veins bulging around his eyes. "It looked to me like the chakra came from his Sharingan." "Is that a power, then?" Hanabi wondered. "Making giant armor out of chakra?" Niji twitched. "It can't be," he protested. "That doesn't make any sense." Itachi, a row or two back, cocked his head. "How so?" he inquired, catching the Hyuga family's attention. "It makes perfect sense to me." Niji's sweat dropped. Susanoo brandished a sword of black flame, and Sasuke swung the blade in a wide arc. Tongues of burning pitch lashed out, carving through the arena floor like a knife through warm butter, gouging deep rifts down even into bedrock. Shiiskyujin shuddered and flexed, and the air whipped and whirled about Susanoo, roaring in displacement with every movement it made. Naruto darted around, nimbly dodging every stroke of Sasuke's giant, burning sword. He flew both metaphorically and literally, zipping about Susanoo's feet and shooting up around its head. He intermittently thrust fists of chakra at the guardian construct's body, hands several times the size of his body appearing out of nowhere to punch the armored icon. Then he began to retaliate in earnest. Holding out his shikujo, the staff he'd formed from a truth-seeking orb, Naruto swiped it through the air. Blades of wind arced out along the trajectory his strokes described, slashing at its limbs. He stabbed the butt of the staff down, and the ground at Susanoo's feet turned to mud, a deep mire, burying it up to its waist. Jabbing the tip upward and swinging the staff down, he called lightning from a clear sky, smiting its head. Spinning it around, he summoned a raging deluge from cracks in the earth, battering its flanks. Thrusting it forth, he spewed a torrent of flames, enveloping its chest. The elements danced at his command, a concert of awesome power swirling about Sasuke's Susanoo. The titanic Tengu staggered under the assault, and the sword dissipated in its hand. After a moment more of this barrage, Susanoo's form wavered, then imploded with a deafening boom. Naruto landed back on the ground, looking up at the smoke. A second later, he felt Sasuke's hand on his shoulder. Heh. I figured you'd escape, he remarked, unperturbed. But how'd you do it, I wonder? It doesn't look like you were in there absorbing the jutsu. I teleported out of the Susanoo halfway through the assault, Sasuke replied. It's a new trick I'd been working on for our fight. I suppose you could consider it a kind of supersized kawarimi, but what about you? Throwing around those jutsu without any hand seals. I've always been terrible at remembering long seal sequences, Naruto said with a shrug. You know that. In 6-pad Sage mode, at least, I find it easier to just manifest the elements and shape them directly. Kinda like with Raisin Shuriken, but simpler. Sasuke rolled his eyes. Only you could say something like that with complete sincerity, Naruto, he said. Literally anyone else would tell you that's completely backwards. Naruto laughed. I suppose it is, isn't it? He said. But I think that's how I've always been. Yes. Perhaps Sasuke chuckled. For a moment, they just stood like that, Sasuke behind Naruto with his hand on the blonde's shoulder. Then they exploded once more into motion. A truth-seeking orb slammed into Sasuke's chest, throwing him back. 2 more orbs followed this one, and began shaping themselves into restraints. Sasuke manifested a partial Susanoo though, and the orbs crashed against an armored torso. Electricity sparked from his fingers. Black lightning crashed down on Naruto's shoulder, throwing him forward, and the blonde had to spin in midair and dig the butt of his staff into the dirt. Forming the seal of confrontation, he conjured up a full-sized bijou shroud. Kurama opened his mouth wide and swung his tails. The barrier surrounding the battlefield shuddered and warped, flexing from the force of terrible shockwaves. The 9 tails spat an incomplete, a wave motion gun of pure chakra blasting out with a roar. It washed over Susanoo, a wall of blinding light. After a moment the giant stood up, seemingly unperturbed, and produced an ornate longbow as tall as the Hokage Tower. It was unfazed, undamaged. Naruto looked out from inside Kurama's throat. You're absorbing ninjutsu now, huh? He guessed. Sasuke smiled and knocked an arrow. So I am. In the waiting area, most of the disqualified participants watched this fight and steadily mounting awe. That's an awful lot of chakra, Karen murmured, swallowing. Wow. Holy shit. Where in the world were they hiding all of that? What do you mean, Karen-san? Lee looked quizzically at his girlfriend. He could see the awesome display out there with his own 2 eyes, of course, but being a pure taijutsu user with no talent for ninjutsu or genjutsu, Lee didn't really have any particular frame of reference for just how much jutsu like this would take out of a normal shinobi, nor any ability to objectively measure the amount of power being thrown around. He understood that this kind of thing was insanely impressive, to be sure. He wasn't blind. But still the sheer scale of this fight kind of threw everything out of perspective. He couldn't even begin to imagine it, despite seeing these things unfold with his own 2 eyes. Those 2 are monsters, Karen said, weakly gesturing to the combatants. She looked pale, and she was trembling. Goddamn, I've never felt so much chakra coming from a single person, ever, let alone 2 at once. She shuddered. It's beyond human. How do you even begin to cultivate reserves like that? Lee cocked his head and hummed thoughtfully for a moment, stroking his chin. Then he smiled and gave his girlfriend a thumbs up. Isn't it obvious? Hard work, of course. He beamed. Naruto-kun and Sasuke-kun must truly be paragons of diligence to achieve feats like this. Mere genius, surely, cannot account for such raw power. Karen's sweat dropped. I don't think you quite get what we're talking about, she mumbled. No matter. Lee laughed and threw an arm over her shoulder. With enough perseverance, even the tortoise can outrun the hare. Maybe they seem overwhelming now, but we'll just have to work 10 times harder to catch up with them. He pulled Karen into a comradely hug, side by side, brimming with warm confidence. She blushed and melted in his arms, suddenly no longer caring about anything else. Raza twitched. I hate you, he told Hiruzen. The Hokage smiled. Whatever for? He asked. You know damn well what for. Raza glared and pointed into the arena, where the form of the 9-tailed demon fox could be seen as clear as day. That. Since when has Konoha had a half a beat? Nearly as long as it has existed, said Hiruzen blithely. Haruna cocked an eyebrow and leaned forward, squinting at the spectacle in the arena. The two male Kage took a moment to appreciate the view. It's a well-kept secret, isn't it? She said. Is it really? Sandame laughed. Perhaps from the children. But otherwise. He shrugged and gestured vaguely. Raza scowled and leaned back in his seat. You are an utter bastard, he muttered. So I have been told. Hiruzen chuckled. A mushroom cloud of light blossomed at Kurama's feet. The gleaming fox bounded aside, tumbling as chunks of earth the size of oxen shot up with the speed of bullets and broke apart on his flank. He spat out a trio of aimed not at Susanoo, but its feet. Explosions ripped through the ground, tearing the arena to pieces. Susanoo staggered for a moment, toppling as it lost footing, only to spread its wings and alight into the sky. At their full size, now, the barrier felt very crowded. Susanoo's wingspan alone reached nearly the full distance from one wall to the other. Kurama's tails beat the sides of the barrier as he sprang up and spread his jaws wide. He roared with his voice and Naruto's, and the blonde formed in the gaping maw, encasing it with a shell made from his truth-seeker orbs. Clawed hands grabbed a Tengu's legs, and a kitsune spat a midnight black globe up into its gut. Susanoo groaned like the sides of a ship tossed about on a stormy sea, and its abdomen depressed as the truth-seeking drove deeper. One hand wreathing itself in black flame, the other shrieking with black lightning in a slow, almost melancholy chi, Sasuke thrust Susanoo's fists down onto Kurama's head. He spat water from his mouth, and beating wings fanned Kagestuchi with a mighty gust. Lightning coursed over Kurama's form, and flames likewise engulfed it. Black smoke and roiling steam billowed out, a booming, flashing thunderhead enveloping the kitsune in a chilling's embrace, and two hands pierced the Kyuubi's shroud at the crown, thrusting down through and into its throat. At the same moment, Susanoo's ribs gave way with a thunderous crack, unable to absorb the truth-seeking shell around the sphere proceeded into Susanoo's chest, where it detonated. The combined force of these attacks shook Shinskyujin, the Hokage-level barrier capable of tanking from the fucking Jubi, and tore into ribbons, destroying it utterly in a single flash of light. The stadium quaked, rumbling down to its foundations. The battlefield disintegrated as a great explosion chewed through dirt and rock, creating a single rift to dwarf every other mar and crater heretofore made, swallowing it all up in a single, uniform depression that spanned the full breadth of the walls and broke through deeply buried pipes. Fresh water poured out from the sides of a crater that had once been the arena, pooling slowly in the very bottom of the vast hole. For a moment, the spectators were breathless. Genma, who had been outside the barrier when it was made, breathed a tentative sigh of relief as he scrambled back down the arena wall. It was cracked and crumbling in places, but overall the stadium itself appeared to have suffered only superficial damage. This seemed frankly miraculous. But that wasn't the only apparent miracle, no. Naruto and Sasuke stood at the bottom of the newly formed basin, standing on the slowly rising waters. Their shirts had disintegrated, and their pants were also fairly tattered, but by and large the pair seemed amazingly intact. That was a nice spar, Sasuke said, smiling contentedly. It was fun, Naruto agreed with a nod. We'll have to do this again sometime. They clasped fingers in the seal of reconciliation. In acknowledgement of my opponent's superior abilities, I surrender, Sasuke said, pointedly speaking loud enough for Genma to hear. Really? It looked pretty even, from where I'm standing, Naruto said with a smirk. I'll defer to your authority in most other matters, Sasuke responded, sniffing. But the Hokage is the strongest ninja in the village. That's the way it has always been. Naruto laughed. Ha! You cheeky bastard. His grin was blinding. Blinking quietly, but feeling glad for the match to finally be over, Genma scurried down and grabbed Naruto's arm, then raised it high. The winner! He announced, slowly catching up to the events and fulfilling his only real job today. By way of forfeit, is Naruto Uzumaki. The crowd cheered uproariously. Konoha's citizens were the loudest of all, and chief among them were Hinata and Sakura. Time is a funny thing. And by funny, I of course mean complicated as hell. Some describe it as a line, an arrow going inexorably from point A to point B. Others say it's like a circle, or a spiral, or some manner of loop, twisting around and repeating infinitely. There are even those who describe it as a tree branch growing out infinitely into the cosmos, sprouting ever more twigs and shoots with every choice and divergence. Despite the many thousands of years man has spent living in time's iron grip, still very little is really known about it for certain, and even much of what is generally held as true is entirely subject to scrutiny and debate. Is time a measurable, quantifiable aspect of nature and the physical world? Or is it an illusion, a crutch to enable the inadequate animal brain to perceive its existence in a way it can process? One thing, at least, that can be said with almost absolute surety is that time is relative. Whether it's clocks in orbit becoming out of sync with clocks on Earth, or the brain altering your perception of the passage of time to suit its purposes, it is pretty much accepted that time's progression, or at least our experience of it, is not a constant value across the board. Rather, it is remarkably subjective, changing locally with any number of factors, more like a matter of opinion than something of fact. So, with all that in mind, we turn the focus of the story to a Konoha 25 years into the future, minus however much time it has been since the 7th Hokage and Pal's first wound up in the past. If you have to visualize it, imagine the timeline of Naruto as a length of ribbon. On that ribbon, there are 2 points that have suddenly been changed. One is the point in which Naruto and friends woke up in the past, and the other is the point at which they left the future. Now fold that mental ribbon so that the future point doubles back to align with the past point. Yes. Let me just say that things are about to get knotted as all hell. Naruto Uzumaki was a heavy sleeper. Once he conked out, you wouldn't be getting any response out of him. You could douse him with cold water, yell in his ear, march a parade through his bedroom, but he wouldn't wake up until morning. And he was a slow waker too. Some people, once they opened their eyes in the morning, reached the maximum level of wakefulness pretty quickly. Naruto was not one of those people. He would wake up in a bleary, half-conscious daze every day, rubbing his eyes and yawning like there was no tomorrow. He usually spent his entire early morning in a fugue state, zombie-like and sluggish. Only once he got outside into the sunlight would he really perk up. So it was understandable that he would, when waking up that morning, be only vaguely cognizant of his surroundings. That he would look at an expanse of pale flesh covered only by sheer white lace, feel long and silky locks of hair bundled up under his chin, or stare into pale, milky eyes and not register anything odd. He might have been an indefatigable bundle of energy during the day, but in the time immediately before and after falling asleep and waking up, Naruto was effectively dead to the world. Naturally, it took him a few minutes to process what he was looking at. Hinata Hyuga, in contrast to Naruto, was a quick and early riser. When she woke up in the morning, she snapped into immediate wakefulness. Part of this was taught, but another part was natural inclination. Early morning was a time when she could feel at ease, free of pressure or scrutiny. Of course, the Hyuga family had a good share of early risers, but that was more out of necessity. Ninja had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. Such lessons were drilled into their heads from youth, and reinforced by the demanding shinobi lifestyle. An early riser wasn't necessarily the same as a morning person. Many ninja, particularly among younger generations, willfully slept in whenever they could afford it, as such a luxury was rare on missions. They might have been capable of waking up early and waking up fast, but that didn't mean they had to like doing so. And most didn't, honestly. But Hinata was an exception to that rule. She woke early and with immediate clarity, instantly able to assess her surroundings and take stock of potential threats. As a Hyuga, she had been taught this much practically from the cradle. And often she woke early in the morning just to have time to herself. She sincerely enjoyed it. So she was immediately aware of something very strange, but very wonderful, when she looked into a pair of soulful blue eyes set in a chiseled, manly face lined with all too familiar whisker marks. And when she looked down to see a pleasantly toned and powerful chest with healthy skin, a chiseled abdomen, going down further under the sheets, with just the faintest glimpse of blood spurted from her nose. At the same moment, Naruto suffered from the same affliction, realizing all at once that he had woken up next to a very pretty, very buxom, and very lightly dressed beauty of an older woman. The two unfortunate youths rolled out of the bed, seemingly propelled by their nasal hemorrhaging. WH what? Naruto squealed. He half expected his voice to crack with the exclamation, but it actually sounded curiously deep. Not that he was in any condition to ponder that. Eh? Who are you? He tried hard not to look at the woman's body. It was difficult with how little she was wearing, of course, and he couldn't help being drawn into the valley of her cleavage. Naruto-kun, Hinata murmured, her face burning up. Is that you? Naruto blinked. Huh? Do I know you? He looked cornered and a little frightened, though not dramatically so. Obviously he was uncomfortable, and this time he definitely couldn't help staring. It wasn't like he'd ever seen this kind of thing so close up in person before. The most exposure he'd had to the female form was from the occasional underwear catalog or discarded swimsuit calendar, and the rare girly mag he managed to swipe under the nose of that cranky old geezer at the bookstore. He was only 12. Old enough to appreciate the female form, yeah, but not old enough to have realistically and ethically had any true, first-hand experience. And that was a marvelous body. How old was this lady? He wondered idly, staring at her nightgown. 20? 25? A part of him didn't care. She was gorgeous. Hinata gulped, blushing and trying hard not to stare at a chiseled physique, or the boxers which hung perilously low on lightly tanned hips. This situation was so far beyond anything she could comprehend, and she felt slightly numb in a way. She was probably in shock, overloaded from this immense stimulus. And the immense bulge. Hinata's nostrils exploded with a second wave of blood, and her eyes nearly rolled all the way up into the back of their sockets. She swooned. Naruto, who was so damn confused, and so singularly fascinated by the sheer fabric of this lady's nightgown, was motionless for a moment. His brain was frozen in shock, unable to process what it was looking at. His body, however, moved on instinct, seemingly of its own accord. Strong arms caught Hinata nearly as soon as she began to fall, wrapping around her body and holding her close to a firm chest. Naruto didn't know what to think. The lady in his arms let out a strangled squeak, going red as a beet. She fainted dead away. A beet. Naruto realized he was a very pretty, unconscious woman in his arms. A very pretty, unconscious woman who wore nothing but an embarrassingly sheer and low-cut nightgown. It was not, perhaps, a terribly risque garment, but to a young and romantically inexperienced lad like himself, she might as well have been completely naked. It also didn't help that her body was very close to his. Very close. Bright blue eyes rolled up in their sockets. A weak, woozy sort of groan escaped Naruto's mouth. Spurt. Blood trickled from his nostrils. Naruto Uzumaki collapsed in a dead faint. When Sasuke Uchiha awoke, the first thing he noticed was that he was naked. This was mildly distressing, as he never slept in the nude. Ever. The second thing he noticed was that he was lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room, and that his surroundings seemed somehow smaller than they ought to have. Proportions were all subtly off, skewed lower and closer seeming than his brain expected. The third thing he noticed was that his left arm seemed to terminate prematurely in a useless stump of a thing. He had only a single hand, a single usable arm. And this realization would have sent him into a bit of a panic, regardless of his usual stoicism, if not for the next thing he noticed. Namely, the naked woman lying next to him. Except that saying she was next to him implied at least some modicum of distance separating their bodies, while here that was clearly not the case. She was practically lying right on top of him, to be frank, an arm curled around his shoulder, while her lower half draped intimately over his midsection, and certain parts of her body were nuzzled very uncomfortably close to a bit of aching stiffness unrelated to either muscles or exercise. And Sasuke probably would have gone into shock at this realization right away, if he hadn't then noticed something even stranger. The person lying next to / on top of him was clearly an adult woman, fully grown and mature. He could tell that much even in this dim light. She had, well, all the features indicative of an adult woman, and many of those features were pressed very snugly against his own body. But that was part of the strangeness. Sasuke Uchiha was only 12, and not particularly tall for his age. So why on earth did this adult woman look shorter than him? She didn't have the proportions of a dwarf or pygmy, being shaped in the ratios of her arms and legs and torso like an ordinary-sized adult. So what the hell was this? The fact that she had pink hair of the same shade as one of his new teammates didn't help anything. Anxiously, Sasuke stirred. He tried to push the woman off of himself, wincing at the rather upsettingly pleasant discomfort of certain things rubbing together. He stopped, uncontrollably blushing a deep red, and took a sharp breath in an attempt to calm himself. His brain was swirling despite an inability to think anything remotely coherent, and he was painfully cognizant of the fact that any attempt to maneuver this woman off of him with his single arm would be sure to meet with considerable complications. With a sound distressingly similar to a whimper, Sasuke went still and tried to think of a solution. But this was in vain. He was at a loss, and no ideas were forthcoming. Twitching and fidgeting unconsciously, feeling intensely uncomfortable with how content certain newly surfacing parts of his psyche were with this position, he tried to roll over. Nothing doing. That only exacerbated the problem, with how entangled her limbs were with his. She clung tightly to him in her sleep, made some worryingly fascinating noises in response to the movement of his body. He stopped, tense with anxiety and dread. Slowly, over several agonizingly long seconds, he perceived the woman beginning to stir. She yawned and mewed, shifting atop his body in ways of which he was far too acutely aware. Her eyes fluttered open to reveal striking emerald lamps. Despite himself, Sasuke's heart skipped a beat. The woman blinked. She stared at him, and he saw some sort of realization dawning on her face. It seemed she had been equally unaware of this arrangement. Eyes went wide as dinner plates. She froze up, going stiff as a board. After several seconds of unbearable silence, a shrill and piercing shriek tore from her lips. "Kaya!" she screamed, scrambling off of him as though burned. She grabbed the sheets and pulled them up to cover herself, cowering and pointing accusingly. "Pervert! Pedophile! Get away from me, you dirty old geezer!" She sprang off of the bed and dashed to the door, then, making a break for it. Sasuke stared in disbelief, flatly uncomprehending. Frozen in place. The woman continued to yell and raise a ruckus, fumbling and struggling with the doorknob for a moment in her panicked state. The door swung open, after a second, but it had nothing to do with the woman. She stumbled back and fell flat on her bottom, wild-eyed in surprise. She stared up a slender, willowy figure. Sasuke stared too. A teenager stood in the doorway, raven-haired and bespectacled, dressed in smartly conservative night clothes. She held a kunai in a reverse grip, and stood low in a combat-ready stance, scanning the room with sharp, piercing eyes. Red eyes ringed with commas, 3 tomo apiece whirling around small, dark pupils. Sasuke's breath caught in his throat, unable to believe what his brain told him he was seeing. The woman, who was bearing more and more of a resemblance to Sakura Haruno the longer he looked, went still, looking uncertain but hopeful. For a moment, the three of them stood in place. This was one of those moments, those instants that seem to catch and lag in the stream of time, a second that stretched out interminably into perceived eons of heavy, awkward silence, a tension like the sticky and viscous pull of a tar pit holding them all in place and dragging them down into its unfathomable depths. The moment hung there for ages, seemingly refusing to budge or progress, like a scratched DVD that got stuck on a scene forever, refusing to progress more than a single frame before pausing for several seconds, then starting, then pausing, and forcing the viewer to frustratedly jab the skip or rewind buttons on their remote or DVD player in a futile attempt to get to a part that would run properly. But then, abruptly and unceremoniously, it ended, and time once more resumed its natural flow. The teenager dropped out of her stance. Her Sharingan, deactivated, and she looked away with a despondent sigh. Color drained from her very being, or so it seemed, and her exhalations seemed to expel all the energy from her body. She looked at Sasuke and the woman with dull, glassy eyes like those of a dead fish. Almost one might fancy, if this were rendered in manga style, that a wisp of soul shaped like a tiny, Casperesque ghost of the teen was trying to escape her mouth as she sighed. She looked like a woman who had just witnessed something no mortal should ever have to behold. "I see," she murmured. "So you guys are into that kind of play, now I should have known." She twitched and listlessly turned around, holding her kunai only limply. Looking over her shoulder, eyes glazed and staring somewhere into an indeterminate distance, she weakly raised the corners of her mouth into a stiff, hollow rictus. Her face was ashen, and she looked vaguely traumatized. "Sorry for interrupting, Mom, Dad." Sasuke blinked. He took a moment to process this. The woman blinked. She turned to stare at Sasuke. For several long seconds she looked at his face, confused and curious. Then her eyes lit up with recognition, and in the same moment Sasuke knew, perversely, why this woman bore such a resemblance to Sakura Haruno. "Sasuke-kun!" The pinkette squealed, immediately brightening. Despite having the stature and ahem, proportions of a grown, mature woman, her bearing and speech in that instant was undeniably that of a young girl. A young fangirl. Sasuke tried not to scream. Boruto Bolt Uzumaki and Sarada Salad Uchiha were two of a kind, some said. Acclaimed as geniuses both, whether rightly or wrongly, as the Hokage's son and heiress of the clan Uchiha, they were respected and admired by many of their peers, and favored as well by some of their elders. Bolt, at 17 years of age, was in many ways the spitting image of his father, but in others also a very different person. With the benefit of parents to help him and teach him, he excelled early on where his father had floundered for many years, growing more quickly in skill, if possessing a similar lack of restraint or respect for authority. He grew up in his dad's shadow. Many people judged him in comparison to the Nanadame, even now, and from a young age he had gotten so sick of complete strangers cooing over him and asking if he wanted to be like his father, that he had quite firmly decided long ago to never even consider pursuing that position. He didn't have to follow the same path as his dad. He was his own man, damn it. 5 years of service as a shinobi had done much to smooth out the rough edges of Bolt's personality, and he had over the years faced and overcome his own share of hardships. He had distinguished himself as an excellent and capable shinobi in his own right, growing into a reliable if not always responsible ninja of the leaf. He better appreciated, as a young man nearing adulthood, just who his father was to the village and the world of shinobi, and had come to terms with the frustration and resentment he'd once felt. Not to be mistaken, Bolt was still standoffish and disrespectful to his father at nearly every turn, but it came now from a place of fondness and, somewhat paradoxically, genuine respect. He derided his dad as an uncool and out-of-touch old stiff, and scoffed at people who acted overawed by the man, but it was in the manner of a healthy teenager expressing their independence, rather than an angry child railing against what he saw as an unfair world. Sarada, in turn, was blessed with the fame of the Uchiha clan, and cursed with their infamy. Those people closest to her parents' inner circle tended to treat her fondly, and those a little further out were prone to admiring both her skill and potential. But at the edges of the comfortable little circles in which she had grown up, there were many people who disdained, resented, or outright hated the Uchiha, whether out of mere principle or genuine grievance. In her early years, her mother had done a good job of sheltering Sarada from the more unpleasant truths of her father's ancestry. While Sarada had always been clever and inquisitive, Sakura managed to gloss over a lot of the messier details of the Uchiha clan's sordid past, focusing on the positive, emphasizing the good and admirable parts of their history while her daughter was young. Now obviously Sarada had issues with her dad while growing up, mostly in regards to his nearly constant absence for a good chunk of his life. She'd been 12 when she met him for the first time. But that was in the past. Sasuke Uchiha had fulfilled his mission years ago, and had made up for lost time as best he could. He was awkward, socially, and a bit dour at times, but the Uchiha family had managed to make its share of happy memories. And furthermore, as a modestly experienced kunoichi herself, and one aspiring to be Hokage at that, Sarada could now understand why her dad had done what he did the way he did it. Shinobi had their duty, and that duty had to be carried out unquestioningly. Wanting to make a world where such things weren't necessary was a not inconsiderable part of her motivation to become Hokage. But it was a long journey, and while Sarada was certainly a most favored candidate, highly esteemed within Konoha, there were still those who remembered the sins of her forefathers, and who bitterly held those crimes against her. She'd come a long way, but hatred was slow to erode, and slower still to be forgotten. A lot of people had grievances against her ancestors, just or unjust, and even her own father faced lingering resentment despite all he had done for the village and the Shinobi Union in the years since the war. Bolt and Sarada both respected their fathers, in their own ways, and loved their mothers dearly. Yet for many years they had lived in relative ignorance of their parents' pasts, an obliviousness common to youths. They had long taken it for granted that their parents were who they were, and only occasionally had they delved into the sordid histories. But as the two of them neared adulthood, they became more aware of who their parents were as human beings, as people with strengths and weaknesses, fallible human beings with flaws and quirks and likes and dislikes and many more years of life experience, too. They knew some of the story, of course, but as time passed they grew slowly more inquisitive. They wanted to know more. Normal teenagers would not have been so consumed with curiosity, but Boruto Uzumaki and Sarada Uchiha were hardly normal by any stretch of the imagination. Nor were their parents ordinary people either. They were extraordinary, all of them, down to the last one. Hey, Konohamaru-sensei, what were my parents like when they were kids? Bolt posed this question one day as the team waited for their orders in the local burger shop. They had just gotten back from giving their report on a B-rank mission to investigate allegations of magisterial corruption in a small, rural province at the daimyo's request, a boring and unglamorous kind of job, but nonetheless very important. Or that's what his dad said, at least. Every mission was equally crucial to maintaining Konoha's status and reinforcing the image of the Shinobi Union as a for-profit peacekeeping organization, rather than a collective of mercenary nation-states. Less the French Foreign Legion, and more the International Peace Corps. Or something like that. Blah 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 was all Bolt ever really heard from his dad's lectures. The man was so boring when he got started on that crap that Bolt could never stand to pay attention to more than half of it. But regardless of their latest mission's value, or lack thereof, Bolt asked his question as he and his team were unwinding at the restaurant where they usually hung out. Mitsuki looked up from his soda in response, quaking a slender eyebrow and saying nothing. Sarada, seated next to Bolt, gave him a curiously searching look. Konohamaru blinked. You want to know about your dad? He said. Wow, it's been a while since you've asked me anything like that. I want to know what he was like as a kid, Bolt reiterated. Him and my mom. Hinata-san too? I didn't know her all that well. Back then Konohamaru looked a touch sheepish. He shrugged. What were they like? Bolt asked, stubbornly repeating his question. He had an odd look in his eye, a bullheaded obstinacy so much like his father's beginning to surface. Nostrils flared. Konohamaru sighed and hummed to himself, gesturing vaguely. Well, if I had to say, I guess. Konohamaru grinned. He was every bit as cool as he is now, he said, surely not at all biased or looking at the past through rose-tinted lenses. I was his disciple, you know. He taught me his first original jutsu. Knowing exactly what this first original jutsu was, Sarada twitched, Mitsuki grinned, and Bolt scowled. Was he really that cool? The blonde skeptically muttered. I wonder. Of course he was, Konohamaru said stubbornly. Do you doubt your sensei's word, Bolt? Hokage-sama is the coolest ninja in the whole village. Heh, I can believe that, said Sarada, smiling fondly. Ugh, you so have a crush on my dad, Bolt said, making a face. Gross. Sarada twitched. I do not, she snapped, brandishing a fist warningly and glaring daggers at her teammate. Get a room, you two, Mitsuki drawled, smirking. You stay out of this. Bolt and Sarada snarled in unison, wheeling around on the third member of their squad. Konohamaru laughed. Some while later, Bolt and Sarada were walking home from the burger joint. Together. Without Mitsuki or Konohamaru-sensei accompanying them. This was solely because they lived in the same part of town, and would thus have to take a similar route anyways, and not for any other reasons, they would assure you. It wasn't like they enjoyed spending time together or being alone with each other, no matter what some people might insinuate about the two of them. They didn't hold hands or anything like that. They weren't dating. They just walked each other home. That was all. And if their route home usually happened to take them through some remote and secluded parts of the village which few other people frequented, and where there were many nooks and crannies where an amorous young couple could secret themselves away for some well-earned private time, well, surely that was just an innocent coincidence, and not at all indicative of any ulterior motives on their parts. And Sarada surely wasn't at all disappointed when they were nearly at one of those convenient hiding places where a couple of young lovers like themselves, but not themselves, obviously, because they weren't lovers or anything of the sort, could kip away for a brisk snog, only for Bolt to stop short and let out a sigh that made it clear his mind was on very different matters from Sarada's. Not that this meant Sarada's mind was in the gutter. She wasn't a pervert. No, she was just thinking about other things. Unrelated to whatever Bolt was thinking. But not related to, anything dirty. She wasn't a pervert. Seriously, though, Bolt sighed, interrupting the suspiciously specific denials of Sarada's inner narration. I wonder what our parents were like as kids. Sarada cocked an eyebrow, surprised. You're still on about that? I don't know. He shrugged. It's just been bugging me lately. I'm curious, that's all. Bolt Uzumaki, curious? Now there's a recipe for disaster, if ever I've heard one. Sarada was joking, mostly, but something in her teammate's expression made her wonder, for just a moment, if there mightn't be a degree of inadvertent truth to her teasing. There was something furtive about the way he flicked his eyes this way and that through the alley, and he fidgeted slightly in a manner Sarada had learned to associate with anxiety over getting in trouble for some recent mischief or other. Bolt waved her remark off with a chuckle, though, after a moment, and he gave another noncommittal shrug. You can't tell me you've never been curious about what your dad got up to when he was our age, he deadpanned. Or younger. I've heard the stories, Sarada said, rolling her eyes. As many of them as anyone will tell me, at least. They grew up in a different time, Things were bloodier back then. More complicated. Bloody nothing, Bolt scoffed, gesticulating irreverently. Mom never fails to guilt me about how Dad didn't have any parents growing up, and how she barely knew her own mother. Yeah, I get it. Their childhoods weren't all sunshine and roses. Neither were ours, but you don't hear the US complaining. Sarada looked away and adjusted her glasses. It was more polite than a straight-up facepalm. If you're so sure you already know all the important stuff, then why are you so curious? She patiently queried. This question brought Bolt up short for a second. He colored a bit and averted his gaze, sputtering. We're gonna be adults ourselves soon, he said. We're almost 18, almost 20, practically. Before you know it, we'll be old enough to drink. We're already old enough to marry. His face colored a bit more deeply at this, and he coughed into his fist. Sarada also reddened, and she started to anxiously fidget with the hem of her shirt. I see, she said. Are you making a proposal, Boruto? Call me Bolt, he said reflexively. Everyone does, even my parents. Except when you're in trouble. Yeah. Except when I'm in trouble. Bolt winced. He rubbed a toe in the dirt. Am I, then? In trouble? That depends. Sarada adjusted her glasses again, smiling. Are you going to answer my question? Bolt blushed and spluttered. He cast his eyes around their surroundings. Well, that is to say, he gulped. And no, I'm not, proposing or anything like that. It's not like we're dating or anything, stupid. I don't like you like that. Well, said Sarada smartly. If we aren't dating, then I suppose we have no reason to hide ourselves away in a dark alley and engage in any secret activities. She turned as if to leave, a knowing smirk on her face. Wait. Bolt put a hand on her shoulder. It's, not like I don't, like you or anything. Not that I like you, but, I don't dislike you. He stumbled over his words, red-faced and flustered. Not that, this means we're in a relationship. Because that would make things all sorts of complicated, with your crush on my dad, but aren't you the least bit curious? He fidgeted, and a hand slipped inside his jacket for just a moment. Sarada narrowed her eyes. Okay, one? She said. I do not have a crush on your dad. I just happen to admire him very much, and if I also appreciate the fact that he is decidedly handsome, well, that should work in your favor, considering the family resemblance. She winked cheekily, clearly channeling her mother. Bolt blushed at her words, and her smirk returned full force. Is that a scroll in your pocket? She asked next, or are you just happy to see me? Dee dumbass. Bolt yelped, going beet red. It's just a scroll, obviously. Geez, why do you always tease me like that, you jerk? Because it's funny, Sarada said blithely, before slipping a hand into Bolt's pocket. He froze up, going stiff as a board, and she smirked victoriously. Then she pulled a small scroll out of his pocket. It was ice cold in her hand, and glowed slightly as it met the air. Sarada's eyes went wide, and she looked askance at Bolt. Even without activating her Sharingan, she could see a shitload of residual chakra clinging to the scroll. Whoa, she breathed, tracing a bit of spidery seal work scrawled over the borders, so thickly drawn that the white margins looked a glossy black. What is this, then? Bolt scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. Ah, the old man put some serious protection around those jutsu, he mumbled. Mimetic blockers or something, and lots of other really tricky mind-affecting shit, besides. I had to put all kinds of seals on the scroll just so I wouldn't forget what I was transcribing halfway through. Sarada looked at Bolt, feeling a chill go down her spine. Jutsu? She said. Boruto, what kind of jutsu would you want to transcribe that the Lord Seventh would see fit to protect that heavily? And why? A time travel jutsu, Bolt said, beaming. I want to see what our parents were like as kids, you know? This seems like the best way to do it. A beat. Time travel. Sarada deadpanned. Seriously? Is this really about wanting to find out more about your parents, or are you just curious to see if you can do it? Bolt's talents were considerable, and had gotten his team out of many sticky situations. He was a genius when it came to the ninja arts, and always working to push his limits, to distinguish himself from his father. Yet, while his drive and proficiency were usually beneficial to the squad and the village, there were also times when Bolt's talent, ambition, and disregard for authority melded together into singularly awful clusterfucks of bad ideas. This, Sarada had swiftly become convinced, was one such situation. Bolt shrugged. A little of both, honestly. A sigh. Sarada's eyes twitched. You know there's a reason your dad sealed all those jutsu away, she drawled. Even apart from almost all of them being purely theoretical and completely untestable, the possible ramifications of screwing this up, she shuddered. And even if you do perform it perfectly, there's no way to know whether it will even work. If we even want it to work. Oh, what are you scared of? Bolt asked. There's no way the two of us can mess this up. And if it doesn't work, then it just won't have any effect. No harm, no foul, you know? Or it could have some catastrophic effect that we can't predict, Sarada said. I don't fancy being remembered as the person responsible for destroying the space-time continuum. And what's this wee business? Bolt flushed and scratched the back of his neck. He gave a disarmingly contrite grin that made Sarada's heart skip a beat. Not that she was attracted to him. And I figured you'd want to see what they were like more than anyone, Sarada, he said, gesturing vaguely. My dad and your parents were on the same team as Genin, right? It only seemed right for me to take you along. And besides, in the first place, you're the only person I'd want to travel back in time with. He mumbled this last part so quietly that it was almost inaudible. Sarada blushed a color indistinguishable from the hue of her Sharingan. Ah, she said. Well, or when you put it like that, I guess I can't really complain. She coughed into a fist, her glasses fogging up. Bolt grinned and took her hand. What do you say, Sarada? Wanna see what our parents were like? Yeah. Sure, why not? She nodded vigorously and unfurled the scroll. Feeling recklessly emboldened, she read the name of the jutsu Bolt had transcribed in his neatly messy hand. It looked pretty complicated. And that was a real mouthful of a name, wasn't it? They worked well into the night, practicing the hand seals and perfecting the jutsu formula, dripping their blood into the heart of the sprawling ritual circle. Some of the instructions were very arcane, and they could only do so much to elucidate the text. It had been written in an older mode, using ancient and complicated forms of many kanji, with no kana at all, more like traditional Chinese than modern Japanese. Even with Sarada's vast knowledge of numerous subjects, and Bolt's talent for astounding leaps of deduction and invention, it still took them many hours just to make sense of the instructions, half of which was spent double and triple checking their work for errors. The description of the jutsu itself was a lost cause, however. Unlike the dry and clinical terminology of modern jutsu researchers, whoever had created this technique had written it more like a religious text with many archaic, seemingly nonsense turns of phrase and a great deal of metaphors and allusions. The language was annoyingly flowery and non-literal. While the directions for performing the jutsu were relatively clear and straightforward, reading the rest of it felt like trying to get scientifically sound information from a medieval. It was colorful and poetic, but not terribly helpful. In the end, they gave up that part of the text as a lost cause and turned their focus solely to the instructions. That was really all they needed for performing the technique, anyways. Having thrown all caution to the wind at the entreating look on Bolt's face, Sarada helped him perform the final steps of the jutsu. It was midnight by the time they finally reached that point, and it was 10 minutes into the new day before they finally finished weaving all of the requisite hand seals. Kinpa! They intoned in unison. Seijin Kashin Jikin Mawashi no Jutsu. For a moment, nothing happened. Then nothing else happened for several more minutes. And after that period, nothing at all happened. Period. They felt their chakra drain away by a good portion when they performed the final step, but there was no other cue, no other sign that they had been successful. No flash of light, no puff of smoke, no great and deafening rumble. Not a single goddamn thing to show for their efforts. It didn't work, did it? Bolt said. Doesn't seem that way, no? Sarada sighed. What a shame. I was actually getting a little excited to see it happen, after all that work. Looks like the jutsu was a dud. Damn it, Bolt groaned. I really wanted to go back in time. Yeah. I guess that kind of thing is just a pipe dream in the end, isn't it? I guess. Yeah. Bolt scratched the back of his head. Geez, we should probably head home. It's really late. Mom's probably worried about being sick. Oh, you're not a child anymore, Sarada said, rolling her eyes. I'm sure she realizes you can take care of yourself. You underestimate my mom, Bolt deadpan. They parted with a shared laugh and commiserating grins, homeward bound. When Sarada got to her family's house, the lights were off and the doors were locked. Her parents were almost certainly asleep already. Clearly they hadn't bothered waiting for her. Sweat dropping, the teenager tentatively shimmied up to her bedroom window and sneaked in that way, checking for any traps that might have been laid along her way. Sasuke Uchiha was, as a ninja and a father, of the mindset that if his daughter was going to be staying out late, she had better be on her guard at all times. And what better way to hammer this lesson into her head than by setting tripwires and non-lethal sealed traps to keep her on her toes, whenever she was out past curfew. If she was careless and set one off, that was rebuke enough. It was half punishment, half training, half rite of passage. If she wasn't able to make her way inside the house without setting off any of the traps, then clearly she was not yet ready to be going on dates or staying out late. So Sarada was thorough and cautious in her sweep, checking every inch of her path, not letting down her guard until she had gotten into her bedroom and given it a floor-to-ceiling check. 3 times over, just to be safe. Then she changed into her pajamas, brushed her teeth, and settled into bed. It felt like she was hardly asleep for any time at all before she was jarred awake by her mother's scream. And leaping instinctively into action, she armed herself and dashed to her parents' bedroom. What she saw there? Well, it reminded her why she had done so much to repress the visits home her dad had made during his extended missions abroad. Those two were into some traumatizingly kinky shit. No kid should have to see their parents getting it on, but Sasuke and Sakura were like rabbits, and Sarada was critically unlucky. They at least had the decency to never bring it up. Bolt slept peacefully the whole night. His rest was uninterrupted, and he did not stir until morning, when he felt someone tugging on his arm. Bro came the whine of his little sister, Himawari. Get up! Mom and Dad are still asleep. I need you to take me to school. Groaning, Bolt cracked his eyes open. He yawned and sat up in his bed. They're asleep? He said, looking at his alarm clock. It was 9:15. I had to make myself toast for breakfast, she answered. They must have been really busy last night. Bolt rubbed the crust out of his eyes. Huh. That was something. Mom and Dad were still asleep? Shikamura was gonna be pissed. His old man rarely got to work later than 8, and sometimes had to leave as early as 7 or 6:30. There was no rest for the weary, not when they were Hokage, and Naruto's assistants were probably pulling their hair out right about now. And their mom was one of the most domestic people they knew. She was someone who lived to care and nurture, usually waking up before anyone else and starting on the day's chores while the morning was still dark. If being a housewife was a career, then Hinata Uzumaki was a single-minded businesswoman. It wasn't unheard of for his parents to sleep late. On special occasions they would stay up past midnight and enjoy themselves, go out dancing or drinking, or have dinner with old friends, and the morning after they might indulge themselves and sleep in a little. But as far as Bolt knew, there had been no such event last night. If his parents had gone out, they would have called him to see if he could babysit Himawari. She may have been going into her final year at the academy, but she was still their precious little cinnamon bun. Absent-mindedly, Bolt grabbed his phone and checked it to see if they had called him, or tried to. Nope. Nothing. The most recent message was a dirty joke Chaochu had forwarded, and the only missed call had been from Mitsuki at around 8 the previous night. The last call on record from either his mom or dad's personal phones, or the house phone, was 3 days old, from before he and his team had set out on their previous mission. It was possible they tried to call him and been unable to get through, but something in Boruto's gut told him that this was unlikely. Maybe they were sick? He should probably check in on them, just to be sure. But first, he should really get Himawari to school. "Give me a moment to get dressed, sis," he said. "Then I'll give you a lift." Okay. Himawari beamed and walked back out of the room to give her brother some privacy. Moving like greased lightning, liberally abusing the Shunshin no Jutsu to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible, Bolt grabbed some clothes, splashed his face with water, and dressed. He could wash more thoroughly once he got back home, since it was a day off for him anyways. As long as he looked presentable. "Alright, come on sis," he said, grabbing Himawari's hand and accepting a thoughtfully proffered piece of toast. "Don't want to be late, do we?" "No, we don't." Himawari giggled and held on tight. Taking a moment to focus, Bolt needed his chakra and sought out the academy in his mind's eye, clinging to a beacon of sorts outside the gate. One moment, they stood in the kitchen of the Uzumaki household. Next, they were at the academy. No transitionary state, no puff of smoke or flash of light, no trippy tunnel or melting backgrounds. It was so quick that for a nanosecond they existed in both places at once. When it came to the art of the Flying Thunder God, instantaneous was truly instantaneous. Himawari giggled as she let go of her brother's hand, giddy from the rush of getting to experience his Horatian. She waved to him and smiled cheerfully, before running in the gate to greet her school friends. "Have a good day at school, sis," he called out to her. "I will, brother," she responded. One of her friends tittered, and another pointed at Bolt and blushed. Himawari beamed and chatted a mile a minute, and soon they were heading inside. Bolt saw one of the boys blushing and staring at Himawari. He narrowed his eyes and glared. The kid paled, quailed, and ducked out of sight, not sure why he felt like someone had just walked over his grave. It took Bolt a moment or two before he was willing to leave. Himawari was so goddamn adorable, he just wanted to protect her forever. She was too precious, the most Muto. He loved her to bits. Sarada was making herself a late breakfast and trying to forget what she had seen in her parents' bedroom when her dad came stumbling into the kitchen, a haunted look in his eye. "What fresh hell is this?" he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair and leaning weakly on the counter. He was pale, like he had just seen a ghost, and his clothes also looked rather bedraggled, as if he'd gotten dressed one-handed in the dark while desperately fighting off a horny fangirl. And then his face reddened suddenly, as if he was remembering how pleasantly shaped said fangirl's body had seemed lying next to him. His gaze was distant and glassy. "Did you and Mom go out drinking last night?" Sarada said neutrally. She avoided looking at him as she mixed a light drizzle of honey into her oatmeal. Sasuke gave her a bewildered look. "Is that woman really your mother?" he asked, a hint of something like miserable disbelief in his tone. Sarada replied with a baleful stare. A vein throbbed in her forehead. "Dead," she said dangerously, her sharing and flashing to life. "Don't you dare start that again." Sasuke did not quail. He had his pride. So he swallowed the fear that welled up at the look on the girl's face and focused on another part of her statement. "Namely, why do you keep calling me Dad?" Sarada stared at Sasuke. She reached into the cutlery drawer. Very slowly, she took out a butcher's knife. For a moment, she didn't do anything else. She just looked at Sasuke with her sharing an active and a butcher's knife in hand. The killing intent rolling off of her was jounin grade, at the very least, on par with the likes of Zabuza Momochi. She could have done better, of course, but he was family. This was basically just a mild scowl in the Uchiha household. If Sarada wanted, she could have dropped an elephant simply by glaring. No Sharingan, just Saki. Sasuke, being in fact an inexperienced 12-year-old who had never before encountered this sort of killing intent, wet himself. Just a little bit. That's not a funny joke, Dad, Sarada said, her voice as cold as ice. We've had more than enough drama over this crap. We don't need any more. Okay? Sasuke whimpered. Try as he might, he could not regain his composure. Is this some kind of genjutsu? He wondered to himself. I need to break out of it. He reached for the knife in Sarada's hands, a hint of desperation in his expression. She pulled it back and gave him a disbelieving look. You're drunk, aren't you? She said. Geez, Dad. If you think you're trapped in a genjutsu, just activate your Sharingan. Sasuke twitched. Don't patronize me, he growled. Just because I haven't activated my Sharingan yet doesn't mean I can't beat him. I'll find a way to get stronger than anyone, and then I'll kill that man and restore my clan's honor. Even if I don't have the Sharingan yet. A beat. Sarada adjusted her glasses. You have it right now, she deadpanned. Huh, said Sasuke, doing a double take. Sharingan, she said. You've had the Sharingan since before I was born. And restoring our family's honor? Exactly who are you planning to kill, Dad? Did you hit your head or something? Sasuke blinked. Wait. What did you just say? Seriously, did you hit your head or something? No, Sasuke said, shaking his head. The first thing. About the Sharingan. You've had it since before I was born, Sarada said slowly, frowning. Sasuke scowled. And no, he said. That can't be right. You're older than me. Sarada was at a loss for a moment. She looked deeply bemused, and the annoyance was gone. She set the knife on the kitchen counter. Dad, are you okay? She said. Seriously. Maybe you should go lie down. I'll get you a... She stopped, coming up short. Something clicked. Her eyes went wide. Her jaw dropped. She stared at her father in slowly dawning disbelief. Say if I'm older than you, how old are you then? She asked slowly. 12, her father said bluntly, looking at her as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. Sarada's eyes twitched. Oh goddammit, Boruto, she sighed. Okay. Dad? Sasuke? How long has it been since you graduated? Sasuke's expression darkened. I thought I'd already, he muttered. But then that idiot comes along and says we haven't taken the real test yet. I have to be getting there soon, actually. Sarada tried not to hyperventilate. And Mom? She called upstairs. Sakura? How old are you? 12, came the obliviously cheerful response. Why do you ask? Sarada gave up on trying not to hyperventilate. A/N, Bolt is a total tsundere. Just throwing that out there. Naturally, this is the part of the FIC where that epilogue-compliant tag will really start to become a matter of how well I can guess where Kishi and the other people in charge of the Boruto movie will go as far as the next-gen characters and so on. Haha, it's mostly endured as long as it has through a mixture of luck, ambiguity, perception, and a couple of minor author-saving throws on my part. Part of me wants to try and anticipate the most likely canon reveals. Another part of me just wants to go hog wild. I think we can guess which part of me won with this chapter. XP. Also, the internet is a black hole from which zero productivity escapes. By which I mean I've been spending so much time surfing Naruto-themed blogs on Tumblr lately. OTL. Also, I bought J-Star's Victory Versus for PS Vita yesterday, and it is addictive as fuck. Shikamaru Nara was not in a good mood. As the Hokage's advisor and right-hand man, he had some pretty big responsibilities. While his child self may have balked at the workload he dealt with every day, Shikamaru accepted that there was no one more qualified for this job than him. So as much as he would have loved to lie back in the grass and watch the clouds go by, he still came to work every morning. Except for holidays, of course. And Sundays. And family emergencies. And sick leave. And seminars. And personal days. And when he was on vacation. But aside from that, he came into work every morning and did his job as diligently as any member of the Hokage's staff. He was not a workaholic by any stretch of the imagination, but he was enough of an adult to get off his ass and do his damn job. Except for when he just didn't feel like it. But this was much rarer than one might expect of him, if one were to judge the probability by the character and disposition of Shikamaru as he was when he had been a kid. Part of the blame for this disparity could be placed on simple maturity, while the rest lay squarely on the shoulders of his beautiful, wonderful, infuriatingly stubborn wife. Temari Nara could give the wife of Macbeth a run for her money as far as what she could nag and guilt and harangue her husband into doing, and rarely did she lose an argument. Shikamaru may have been technically more intelligent, but Temari was deviously persistent, and also still perilously hot, middle-aged be damned. No matter how well-reasoned a debate he might make, if Temari wasn't convinced, then he wouldn't win. All she had to do was threaten to start sleeping in the guest bedroom and Shikamaru would immediately fold. Thus, despite his natural inclinations, Shikamaru was genuinely a pretty diligent worker. He had to be, as the Hokage's advisor. If there was only one thing to be said in favor of Naruto Uzumaki's skill as a leader, then Shikamaru would claim it to be that Naruto was aware of his own shortcomings, as far as more intellectual matters went. While the guy had come a long way from being the dead last dunce everyone had laughed at back in the academy, the world was still full of people much cleverer than him, and he knew it. So, Shikamaru was entrusted with advising the Lord Seventh in a wide range of matters, helping him hammer out all kinds of complicated policy decisions. Naruto saw the big picture, but Shikamaru looked at the little details. Naruto was the ideal guy, but Shikamaru was the one who figured out if and how to make it work. And Shikamaru was fine with that. Even if he couldn't live the average, unremarkable life he'd always wanted, that didn't mean he had to put himself up on the front stage. He was content to be the right-hand man. As a matter of fact, he preferred it. Shikamaru Nara was, in short, the very antithesis of the stereotypically ambitious and treacherous advisor. But that didn't mean he would be averse to wringing the Hokage's neck if that bastard didn't walk in the door within the next 5 minutes. He still isn't here, huh? Moegi looked around the office, carrying another short stack of forms. Where should I put these? Just set them down on the floor, Shikamaru said with a grimace. Try to leave a clear path, though, will you? He was exaggerating, of course. It wasn't as though the office was in any danger of becoming packed from floor to ceiling with paperwork, there being simply a modest pile on Naruto's desk, but there was still a lot of stuff that needed the Hokage's personal scrutiny or approval. While Konoha's bureaucracy was far from so inefficient as to need the Hokage's signature on everything, there were still mission requests, progress reports, miscellaneous proposals, and other such stuff that required Naruto's attention. Moegi smiled sheepishly and set the forms on the desk. There hasn't been any word, then? She asked. I think someone would have raised a fuss by now if he was sick. And he didn't say he'd be coming in late, either, unless I'm much mistaken. Right. He didn't, yeah, Shikamaru sighed. Which is why I'm starting to seriously consider an assassination attempt if he doesn't get here soon. I think you'll have to get in line behind a few people for that, Moegi chuckled. Probably. Shikamaru shrugged and glanced at the papers. I've sent Udan over to check up on the guy, and hopefully Hinata doesn't mistake that for an attempt on her husband's life. We've lost too many good A and B that way. He has a very non-threatening presence, Udan does. I'm sure even Hinata-san wouldn't perceive him as an assassin, Moegi said, smiling and waving a hand dismissively. One of them probably just came down with a cold and lost track of time. It's happened before. Shikamaru hummed and stroked his goatee. Possibly. Somehow I doubt it, though. Do you want me to fetch Sakura-san or Shizen-san? Moegi asked. Because with all due respect, Shikamaru-sama, Even if your intuition tells you otherwise, I still think it would only be prudent to have a medic at the ready. Go ahead, Shikamura said. You're probably right about that much, at least. When it comes to that guy, it's always wisest to prepare for every possibility. Get Sakura, and Sasuke too while you're at it. Between those two, no matter what's keeping the 7th from coming into work, they should be able to handle it. Whether it's a cold, an assassination attempt, or a fit of pique brought on by an impending midlife crisis. He gestured vaguely, concluding his statement. Moegi nodded and curtly bowed. Of course, Shikamura-sama. And for the last time, he added in exasperation, just San is fine. But Moegi had already vanished in a swirl of leaves before he could finish his sentence. Shikamura sighed, looking at the foliage now strewn about on the floor. An eye twitched. I'm not cleaning this up, he muttered. Pain in the ass? Naruto stirred slowly. He felt something soft and a bit heavy lying on top of him. His back ached a little, too, and his feet were a tad chilly. He was on the floor, he realized. How did he get there? Did he roll out of his bed in the middle of the night? Blinking gradually awake, Naruto pondered. Where was he? This didn't look like his bedroom. Not even close. There was zero resemblance between this place and his apartment, wherever this place was. Naruto was at a loss. Soft, he murmured, feeling something squish against his chest. What is this? Then he paused, noticing something odd about his voice. Eh? He said. What's up with this? I sound my voice is all deep. Uncharacteristically deep and low-pitched. He could still recognize it as his voice, but it sounded a fair bit deeper than he could ever remember it sounding before. He hummed thoughtfully. Do I have a cold? He wondered. Curious, Naruto tried swallowing. Smooth, easy, and not at all sore or scratchy. Then he sniffed. Clear, unobstructed, and nearly silent. Odd. It didn't feel like a cold, at least not in that regard. His joints did feel a bit stiff, though, and his back was feeling kinda sore, but the last one may have just been from waking up on the floor. He didn't really feel any sort of headache or general ickiness either. So it's not a cold, then, he mused to himself. A beat. Naruto was struck by a sudden recollection. Oh shit! The test. I almost forgot. Whipping his head around, he sought out the nearest clock he could find. He saw an odd-looking one on the bedside table, one that read 9:15. Crap! Naruto swore. I am so late. In a panic, he pushed the pretty, half-naked woman off of him and darted for the closet. Despite being sure that he had never seen this room before in his life, Naruto was able to find a change of clothes like he had done this 1,000 times before. He was a bit upset that he couldn't find any of his clothes, but he nonetheless grabbed what he could and got dressed. In too much of a hurry to worry about washing up, and hoping Sakura-chan wouldn't notice if he looked a little messier than usual, Naruto rushed out of the room. Again, despite never having been here before, Naruto was able to navigate the house with ease. He didn't notice it, being otherwise preoccupied, and a bit dense to boot, but on some level he seemed to know this place like the back of his hand. Naruto was halfway down the stairs before he realized something. Wait, who was that pretty lady lying on top of me? This thought gave him serious pause, such that he wound up tripping and stumbling. His brain froze up, stunned senseless, as the blonde belatedly registered the fact that he'd woken up underneath a buxom, half-naked beauty. He fell down the stairs and crashed into the landing. It hurt less than he expected. His body rolled as soon as it hit the floor, and he was back on his feet before he even knew what was going on. Whoa, lucky, Naruto muttered, looking down at his body. I'm He blinked. Why was his right arm wrapped up in so many bandages? He didn't remember hurting it. Now that he thought about it, though, it was like that when he woke up, wasn't it? Curiouser and curiouser. Naruto thought about this for a whole 3 seconds before remembering why he'd been in such a hurry. Oh, right, he yelped. Crap, I am so late. Gotta hurry. He ran for the door. Man, what's up with those two today? Boruto muttered to himself as he strode up the steps to the front door. I can see one of them sleeping in, but both? They must be getting old, those parents of ours. With hands in his pockets, lips pursed and brow furrowed, Bolt was lost in thought. He absent-mindedly nibbled on the last vestiges of the toast Himawari had made him and walked up to the door. I should check up on them if they're still asleep, he said to no one in particular. It'd be a nuisance if that old man died overnight and started stinking up the house. Although he'll probably live to 100, as stubborn as he is. Sighing, Bolt reached out to grab the doorknob. He swallowed the last piece of crust and smacked his lips. Wonder if we still have any orange juice? He mused. I'm thirsty. Bolt turned the handle. In a turn of events that probably could have been seen coming from a mile off, the door flew open and smacked him in the face. Bolt staggered for a moment, and that was long enough for his old man to run straight into him. They fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Damn it! Crap! Naruto swore as they toppled. Watch where you're going, you jerk! Gah! Shitty old man! Bolt snarled in turn. Why don't you watch where you're going? He thrashed in frustration as the older blonde fell down on top of him, angrily flailing his arms and catching his dad upside the head with an erratic fist. Ow! That hurt, you bastard! Naruto cursed. And who are you calling a shitty old man? I call him like I see him, you shitty old man! Bolt snapped. What were you doing sleeping in this long, huh? You're way late, damn it! Shikamaru's gonna be seriously pissed at you. How's that any of your business, asshole? Naruto obstinately retorted. And Shikamaru? What's that lazy idiot got to do with anything? Snap. You're the last person who should be calling someone an idiot, Dad. Bolt crashed another fist down on top of his father's head. The older blonde swore vehemently, if not terribly creatively, and he rolled off of his son, clutching at his head. Ow, 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 Naruto said, wincing and rubbing his poor noggin. That really hurts, damn it. He paused, then, trailing off for a moment. Blink. Blink. Wait, what? He stared at Bolt for a second. Hey, did you just call me? Come on, old man, Bolt said, scoffing and holding a hand out. Since you're running so late, I'll give you a lift. Just this once. For a moment, his dad just sat there and stared at him like a complete stranger. Bolt scowled in irritation and thrust his hand out again, this time with greater emphasis. He glowered at his old man in annoyance, feeling irked by the idiotic expression on his dad's face. Come on. You're really late, aren't you? Bolt said, frustratedly running a hand through his hair. Damn it, and this was supposed to be my day off, you know. But his dad continued to stare at him with that stupid look on his face. It was really starting to piss him off. After a seemingly interminable wait, the man finally stopped gaping dumbly and actually spoke. Dad? You know? Naruto said slowly, confusedly shaking his head. Hey, who the hell are you? Now it was Bolt's turn to stare with a stupid look on his face. He felt like a duck in a thunderstorm. Hey, that's not a funny joke, you old coot, he said, irritably scratching his cheek. Don't pretend to have amnesia on me, now. That routine stopped being funny after the third time. Amnesia? Said Naruto, looking completely clueless. Right, I know what you mean. He nodded superciliously. Amnesia isn't funny. I'm sure I don't have anything like amnesia. Who even wants amnesia in the first place? He laughed, but it sounded oddly nervous. Bolt twitched. Dad, seriously? Naruto leaned in close, looking sheepish, and whispered in a conspiratorial manner. So, what is amnesia, anyways? He asked, making a face. It sounds painful. Boruto Uzumaki knew that his father wasn't an idiot. Not really. However silly the man may have acted at times, he nonetheless had a reasonably good head on his shoulders. Even if Naruto had something of a fondness for stupid jokes like this, he wasn't really an idiot. Very funny, Dad, he deadpanned. You're a regular comedian. A beat. Naruto blinked. Right? Ha! He laughed and scratched the back of his neck. Noticeably, he looked a touch uncomfortable, with shifty eyes and nervous fidgeting. So, why do you keep calling me that? Eh? Bolt turned his head to stare at Naruto. His glance turned baleful. Hey, come on. I already told you that joke wasn't funny, old man. What joke? Naruto asked, frowning. Now that I think about it, doesn't it seem more like you're the one pulling a joke on me? Bolt's eye twitched dangerously. Hey, seriously, he muttered in a low voice. Cut it out, Pops. Now's not the time for this lame comedy routine. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and glared. There was something intractably petulant about the expression, a certain childish temperamentality. A look like this wasn't too out of place on his father's face, when the man was fooling around, but this really wasn't the time for the Nanadame to goof off with his son. Bolt thought so, and clearly so did Udan. Hokage-sama! There you are! Came the cry of Konohamaru-sensei's old teammate, a boring but dependable man who did his work in an efficient and unflashy manner, Udan. No last name given. Bolt let out a sigh of relief, seeing the man running toward them. Finally, someone who can talk some sense into this geezer, he thought, looking askance at his dad. He made a face and shook his head, getting up. He's all yours, Specs. Good luck, Bolt muttered before going inside. Udan stared at the young man's back for a moment, befuddled, before rounding on the Nanadame. Hokage-sama, he said again, unmistakably addressing Naruto. Come on. You're late. He grabbed Naruto by the wrist and pulled him up onto his feet. Naruto stared dumbly for several long seconds, rooted in place. Even when the door shut behind him and Bolt vanished from sight, he could only stare at Udan in silent shock. What? He said slowly, blinking owlishly. Wait, what did you call me? For a moment, Udan was bemused. He cocked his head curiously and squinted at Naruto through his glasses. Are you okay, Hokage-sama? He asked. Naruto's eyes widened. Ho Hokage, he murmured. You called me Hokage. Yais, Hokage-sama, said Udan, frowning concernedly. I did. You are, after all, the Lord Seventh. In an instant, Naruto's face lit up like a Christmas tree. His lips split in a grin so wide it could have spanned the Valley of the End, and gleaming eyes kindled with a light that sent a curiously fearful shiver up Udan's spine. I'm the Hokage, Naruto said slowly, grinning uncontrollably. I'm Hokage. Ah, yes, you are, said Udan anxiously. Did you hit your head or something, Nanadame-sama? I'm perfectly fine, Specs. I'm Hokage, after all. Ha ha! Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and guffawed, loud and uproarious. I'm the Hokage! This is actually a pretty good dream, isn't it? Even if it is kinda weird. Ha ha! He threw his head back and lost the howling laughter. Udan's sweat dropped. D-dream? He muttered. Suck on that, world! Naruto shouted to the heavens, ignoring the bespectacled man's weary words. I am the Hokage! Sarada winced, hearing those words. Leaping across the rooftops toward the Uzumaki family home, she anxiously adjusted her glasses and tried to convince herself that this shout was just a coincidence. Biting her lip, she bounded from one roof to the next, hurtling towards her destination at breakneck speed. Boruto, she whispered. I think we've made a grave mistake. The jutsu didn't work the way we expected. We weren't the ones to travel through time. And our parents were complete idiots, she thought as well. Sarada shuddered, recalling how her mom had reacted to the news that not only was she married to Sasuke, but she also had a teenage daughter as well. It's kinda weird how old he is, and I don't get why he's missing an arm, Sakura had said conversationally, eager to start gossiping. But once I get past all of that, Sasuke-kun's still really cool, isn't he? And so dreamy, too, don't you think? Sarada turned a bit green around the gills, so to speak, just remembering those words. Her family life had never been what she would call normal, but she had never before been asked such an awkward question by her mom. Sakura, it seemed, did not completely grasp the little things about what Sarada being her daughter meant, and acted more like the young woman was a sister or older friend. As in, Sakura did not shy away from asking Sarada all kinds of uncomfortable questions about her sex life with Sasuke. No psychologically healthy person wanted to contemplate the idea of their parents having sex, and Sarada was no different. Nor did she want to hear her mom gush about how big her dad's sword had felt, or to be asked to speculate on how good her dad was in bed. Sakura Uchiha had been a pervert for as long as Sarada could remember. Mama's dirty, she used to say in exasperation whenever her mom so much as blushed or giggled, but never before had the woman been so gauche as to talk this directly about such matters with her daughter. No teenager ever wanted to have that kind of girl talk with their mother. Mortification abounding, Sarada took a deep breath and silently pushed these memories to the deepest, darkest corners of her psyche. Let a shrink deal with that matter somewhere down the line. For now, she just wanted to straighten out this fustercluck of a mess. By the time the Uzumaki house was in sight, Sarada couldn't see anyone outside it. She had definitely heard the Lord Seventh laughing and cheering earlier, but when she reached the place the noises had been coming from, he was already gone. Her eyes flickered scarlet for a sec, and she scanned over the area to see if she could find any suspicious traces. She saw nothing. Deactivating her Sharingan, Sarada then performed a simple sensory jutsu. Bolt's chakra was inside the house, along with another, significantly weaker chakra. The general texture of the second signature betrayed similar affinities to Bolt, and the color was similar to Himawari's, virtually identical to Lady Hinata's chakra, save that it was vast orders of magnitude smaller and lighter. Weaker. Much, much, much weaker. Himawari had to have at least thrice as much chakra as this person, and hers was denser as well, thick with a firstborn daughter's share of her father's life force and mother's spirit energy. Whoever this was, they had a chakra like that of Lady Hinata, in shade and hue, but one that was infinitely less in every measurable way. It reminded her of how her parents' chakras had looked. Like but unlike how it should have been, smaller and feebler and lacking much of the richness and subtle nuance they had acquired through decades of use and mastery. This seemed to confirm Sarada's sneaking suspicions. In hindsight, she should have expected something like this from the name of the technique. Seijin Kashin Jikan Mawashi. A sigh. We are so grounded when they get back, Sarada said. I just know it. Hinata woke without a sound, blinking her way owlishly back into the world of the living. She was lying on the floor, she noticed absently, but this fact was of minimal concern to her conscious mind. She was too absorbed in recollections of that wonderful dream. Me and Naruto-kun in bed together, she thought wistfully, her lips quivering into a tiny smile. Ah, if only it were true. Idly, a part of her hoped that Naruto would grow up to be as handsome as the adult him she had been lying with in her dream. Not that she didn't think he was cute or charming now, but well, the Naruto in her dream had been hot with a capital H. Hinata nearly swooned just thinking about it, her cheeks aflame. She clung to the details of the dream as she stirred, refusing to let the memories fade. Lately she had been suffering from nightmares due to stress over the graduation exams, and even passing Kurenai-sensei's personal test hadn't done much to assuage Hinata's anxiety. But she felt almost none of that, now. Her mind seemed clearer, somehow, less frantically energetic. She felt calmer than she had in a very long time, and despite her lingering fears, Hinata found that a part of her was quite content to merely sit up for a moment and bathe in the details of her remembered dream. Her recollections of that wonderful fantasy seemed amazingly clear, nothing like the transient, fleeting substance of dreams. Why, if Hinata didn't know any better, she'd think she was remembering something that had actually happened. Yet that was impossible, sadly enough. Maybe one day, if all the stars aligned in heaven and the earth itself was moved to pity her lot. If pigs grew wings and all her relatives danced naked in the street, and the sky turned green where the grass grew blue, and the sun was snuffed, and the moon was dropped, and all the world came crashing to an end. It seemed terribly unlikely to her, was the point she was getting at. Regardless of any, assets she may or may not have had at her disposal, and regardless of what one might think of her attractiveness or possible lack thereof, it could not be denied that 12-year-old Hinata Hyuga was terribly shy and horrendously insecure. She could barely even bring herself to speak in her crush's presence. Lack of self-confidence had resulted in far greater men and women than she, and Hinata was at a delicate age. Fear of rejection paralyzed her, and in the face of this overwhelming dread she could muster no more courage than to watch from afar and dream idly, hopefully, of one day managing to approach him. So Hinata appropriately relished the memory of a firm and muscular body, nearly naked, flawless dusky skin reddening with a flush, and the glimpse of something she was sure her more conservative relatives would be abjectly scandalized to find her staring at. But in the realm of such a perfect dream, Hinata had felt no shame in taking the time to appreciate what she saw. Even if the view proved too much for her to handle even in her dream, the real Hinata was able to savor it, finding in the belief of this event's unreality the courage and composure to replay the image in her mind's eye, committing it to memory with all the attentiveness of a girl in love. Dimly, she perceived that she was not in her bedroom. Part of Hinata grew mildly distressed by this, worried that something might have happened, but the rest of her still felt oddly at ease, and was taking the time to bask in the lingering memories of her dream. Absent-mindedly, Hinata stood up. She did not think about it at first, because it did not initially register to the girl in her distracted state, but the floor seemed awfully far away, didn't it? If she had been paying attention, she might have felt a slightest rush of vertigo, her conscious mind expecting to fall given how high her head was. Yet her feet somehow managed to reach all the way down. And what was that weight on her chest? Unconsciously rubbing one of her shoulders, Hinata chanced to look down. She barely noticed how far away her feet were. The only thing she could see was those. Hinata's mind went blank. She stared down at her chest, uncomprehending. Certainly, she had read once that stressful environments could cause girls to go through puberty prematurely, a leftover survival mechanism, perhaps, from a time when such stress meant predators or other dangers liable to cut life short, making it crucial to pass on one's genes as soon as possible. She'd started blooming earlier than any of the other girls in her class, and had become used to the inconvenient reality of those lumps hanging from her chest no matter how hard she trained. But this was just ridiculous. This was. Well, she simply had no words for it. Her initial thought, seeing it, was something along the lines of watermelons? That was the first impression she got from the size and shape of what she saw, until her eyes processed the color, the cloth covering, and the fact that these objects were quite clearly protruding from her chest. Blink. Blink. Hinata stared. Hinata stared some more. Hinata stared for a very long time at her breasts. Huge, she thought disbelievingly. How on earth did they get so? Blankly, she grabbed at the knot mounds. That was too little a word. They were more like mountains than anything else. Except that they were soft. Very, very soft. And rounded. More like torpedoes, or bombshells. Or teardrops. There came a knock at the door, and Hinata gave a start. She nearly jumped right out of her skin. Letting go of her Grand Tetons, she belatedly remembered that she was in an unfamiliar room. Meep! She squeaked under her breath, biting her lip. More loudly, trying to inject even an ounce of confidence into her voice as she trembled, a million worst-case scenarios running through her mind at a mile a minute, she said, who is it? Mom? A voice spoke, a young man's voice with more tenor than bass. You okay in there? Dad was acting weird. I think he's come down with something. How about you? Need me to get you anything? Hinata blinked rapidly, several times in quick succession. She stared at the door, and without even realizing it, her eyes began to tense and flex, veins bulging out with no need for instruction. Her body seemed to channel the chakra almost of its own volition, without any need for conscious thought on her part. Byakugan activated of its own accord. She did not even need to wield as much, let alone form the hand seals to help herself knead her chakra to feed and awaken those ravenous eyes. She barely needed to focus on where she wanted to look. Some unconscious aspect of the visual cortex was already committing most of its resources to analyzing a point directly 1.7 meters in front of her, just outside the door. Hinata stared at a teenager with 2 whisker marks on either cheek, a markedly familiar face, and wavy blonde hair vaguely reminiscent of a leaf in the shape of its styling. Everything from the face to the hair to the familiar arch of those lips and squint of those eyes reminded her of Naruto, but she also saw little more. If Hinata looked at herself in a mirror, she might see a number of familiar traits in herself that this youth possessed. His ears, the bridge of his nose, the shape of his chin. Aspects from her own face, touches of a distinctly gracile Hyuga bone structure mixed with a certain subtle broadness and robustness Hinata had come to associate with her crush, Even the color of his skin seemed to be a blend of her and Naruto's complexions, lighter than his but darker than hers. Had she not known any better, Hinata would have thought, for an instant, that this young man could only be her and Naruto's son. But that was impossible, right? And yet, he called her mom. And also, there was still the curious matter of. Again, Hinata looked down at her breasts. This time, with her active, she noticed a plethora of other differences as well. From the length of the arms and legs, to the width of the pelvis, to hints of faint wrinkling and stretch marks in her skin, to a number of faint scars within and without that only a Digitsu user could see with the naked eye, and also to what looked like signs of healed over-tearing in her. Well, let it simply be said that Hinata saw signs that she had long since learned to associate with women who had given birth at least once. Possibly twice. She blinked. Noticing a mild, chronic-seeming ache in her shoulders, Hinata deduced that this wasn't a dream. Looking at the flow of chakra in her body, she could also see no obvious signs of genjutsu. Oddly, though, her chakra looked thinly spread and rather anemic within her circulatory system, like pipes accustomed to the diversion of floods were hosting aught but the merest trickle. Before Hinata could wonder any more about this, she felt her range of vision shrink and distort back into a limited human perception. It swam for a moment, and her head felt awfully light. The last thing she thought, before the floor came rushing up to meet her, was a confused and bleary. Have I already used up that much chakra? Hinata lost consciousness, as much from exhaustion as shock. She hit the floor with a thud. Oh hell! I am so sorry! We never should have done something that stupid. Sasuke stared pensively into the cup of tea sitting before him, remembering the words of the young woman who had called herself his daughter. He hummed in the back of his throat, unconsciously trying to grab the cup with his left hand. But there wasn't a hand there. Not much of an arm either. He scowled and let out a sigh. Time travel, is it? He muttered. It was hard to believe. He probably never would have accepted such a thing as true, if not for the convincing case that girl his daughter, Sarada, had made. He was in the future. A future where he had settled down and started a family. Presumably, this meant his future self had succeeded in killing Itachi. She'd been oddly tight-lipped on that topic. Sasuke hummed. Opposite him sat Sakura Haruno, his teammate. And apparently his wife. On one hand, Sasuke could somewhat kind of appreciate the choice his other self had apparently made. She was an intelligent girl, and honestly a little closer to his tastes than he would, in pride, be willing to admit. Had he not been so driven to distraction for so many years with determination to avenge his family, and had she not joined up with the rest of his squealing fangirls, he might have honestly considered an interest in her. Not that he would ever confess as much. Especially not now, with the girl so starry-eyed and staring at him from across the table. If there had ever been a time when Sasuke Uchiha truly and hopelessly cursed his unwanted ability to make girls go gaga over him, it was now. It boggled the mind. Sasuke didn't see himself as a charming person. He had no idea what all those girls saw in him, to be frank. He was bitter, asocial, wrapped in darkness and scarred by grief. The phrase damaged goods surely existed solely to describe people like himself. He was not the kind of person that he thought a smart or self-respecting girl should pursue. Couldn't they see how messed up he was? How dangerous a path he would have to walk? It galled Sasuke that so many girls should be so smitten with him. It felt insulting, somehow, like their infatuation devalued the tragedy of his clan's destruction, romanticizing his pain and frustration into an unrecognizable caricature of the person he really was. Their smiling, giggling, blushing, and cooing all angered him. Like they saw it all as one big game, like they didn't take anything seriously. They didn't get it. They refused to understand. Sasuke was too different. He couldn't relate to them, couldn't comprehend them. He wasn't like them. Grimacing, he grabbed the teacup with his right hand, then took a sip of its contents. He refused to look Sakura in the eye. You're so handsome, dear red heart, she tittered, undeterred by his attempt to ignore her presence. Her eyes twinkled with glee. Sigh. Sasuke set down his cup. We're not married, he told her. That's not what our daughter said, Sakura replied, waving a hand and smiling indulgently. She's not our daughter, Sasuke replied. She's the daughter of another Sasuke, and another Sakura. You didn't give birth to her, your other self did. I never married you. But we will, Sakura said, clapping her hands and squealing. This is the future, Sasuke-kun. We're destined to be together. What good is destiny? Sasuke muttered. If I had any choice in the matter, my family. He went quiet, pensive. Sakura's smile faltered. Despite her exuberance and cheer at discovering that she was married to Sasuke-kun in at least this future, she was still leagues better at reading the atmosphere than people like, say, Naruto. Her expression fell, and she looked down into her own tea. Not another word was spoken for several minutes. Quietly, awkwardly, the two of them sipped their tea. All at once, after a lengthy quiet, there came a knock at the door. The sudden noise was jarring, and both adult-bodied preteens jumped in their seats. Sakura-san? Sasuke-san? Are you home? Bolt. Sarada's voice rang through the air, and the Uchiha appeared with the faintest flicker of movement. Her hair was a mess and her face was red. She appeared harried and disheveled. Her glasses had slid halfway down the bridge of her nose, and she only took a second to push them back up before ejaculating. Bolt. Crap, we've really messed up, she said frantically. The blonde turned to look at her. His parents' bedroom door was open, and it looked like he had been seconds away from bolting inside. An irritated look crossed his face, and he glowered impatiently at Sarada. Not now, he said. I just heard Mom collapse. She must be really sick. Sarada frowned thoughtfully, and she seemed to hesitate for a second. Collapse? Odd. She narrowed her eyes. But Bolt, I have to know. Were either of your parents acting strange this morning? Bolt grimaced and formed a shadow clone. He nodded to the construct, and his Kage Bunshin headed into the bedroom. Then he crossed his arms over his chest and turned to face Sarada, giving off a weary and long-suffering sigh. Strange? He said. This had better be important. If my mom's got anything serious. He glared warningly. The boy was nearly as protective of his mother as he was of his sister, and once he started worrying about them there was very, very little that could make him stop. Some of his snarkier peers had teased Bolt about having a sister/Oedipus complex more than once. And joking or not, there was a tiny seed of truth there. Himawari and Hinata Uzumaki were very high up Boruto's list of priorities, and even his maybe not girlfriend rarely took precedence. Sarada knew this, and she nodded, collecting her thoughts for a moment before continuing. Please answer my question first, she said, her expression strained. Have they been acting strange? Bolt swore and threw his hands up in the air. Yes, fine. Dad has, he answered snippily. Mom also sounded a little out of it before she collapsed. His expression then became a perplexed one, with just a hint of pink dusting his cheeks, when the sound of his shadow clone dispelling reached their ears. Furrowing his brow, Bolt shook his head, clearly trying to get an image of some sort out of his mind's eye. Chakra exhaustion? He said, bemused. How the heck would she have chakra exhaustion this early in the morning? She and Dad didn't even get out of bed until recently, as far as I know. Sarada hummed thoughtfully. I thought so, she said. Their bodies are used to having much greater amounts of chakra flowing through them, so now that their reserves are so much smaller it's like a sort of chakra anemia. Anemia? Bolt said. Then he shook his head. Wait, what? Why would their reserves be smaller? What the hell were you talking about? Kinpu, Seijin Kashin Jikin Mawashi no Jutsu, Sarada intoned, adjusting her glasses with a grimace. Forbidden technique, art of adult-child body temporal revolving. Or, in layman's terms, a time-travel jutsu that takes a person's consciousness and sends it into the past by switching that present consciousness with a past incarnation. Bolt blinked. Wait, you mean, huh? That jutsu worked? He gawped for a moment, stunned. Then he scowled. Damn it! If you knew that was how it worked, then why did you go along with it? Idiot! Sarada hit him on the head. As if I knew then. I've just put it all together after realizing. She gave him a meaningful look, and gestured into the bedroom. Bolt's jaw dropped as he connected the dots. We switched our parents' brains with the brains of their past selves? Maybe not literally, said Sarada, since they seem able to walk around in their bodies. But their minds? Definitely. Fuck, Bolt moaned. We are so dead if they ever find out. Let alone if Shikamaru-san finds out, Sarada said. I heard your dad shouting a little earlier. He sounded very, excited about being Hokage. Bolt paled as the realization struck. How old are they? Do you know? He asked, looking fearful. Mom and Dad said they were 12, Sarada answered. And you left them unattended? Bolt gaped, disbelieving. I'm not the one whose dad is the Hokage, Sarada retorted. Bolt's heart stopped for just a second. My dad's the Hokage, he whispered. That idiot who doesn't even know what amnesia is the man responsible for Oh shit. Is it that bad? Sarada asked, a little caught off guard by the severity of Bolt's reaction. I thought he was just playing a really bad joke, Bolt murmured in response. But shit, I know he was dead last in his year, way back when, but was he really that stupid? You weren't exactly the brightest yourself, at his age, Sarada replied. I was practically top of the class, Bolt riposted, sounding almost like a whine. Having good grades doesn't preclude you from doing stupid things, Sarada said. Which you most certainly did do. In spades. She gave him a faintly baleful look. Bolt pouted. Sheesh, you're awfully pissy this morning, he muttered. I have seen things no woman should ever have to see, Sarada hissed, glaring so hard that her Sharingan automatically activated. Do not try me today, Burrito. Bolt was silent for a moment. Shikamaru's going to kill us when he finds out, isn't he? Sarada grimaced. Slowly and painfully. He was the Hokage. This was his office. It was a dream come true except for one odd detail. Naruto stared at the heap of papers on his desk. It looked high enough that if he sat down in the seat no one would be able to see his face. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Hey, what's with all this? He asked the bespectacled guy who'd guided him here. Paperwork, said Udan bluntly. Naruto nodded. Yeah, he said. So what's it doing on my desk? Waiting for your signature, Udan replied, giving Naruto an odd look. Wait, you mean this is all mine? Naruto trailed off, his expression turning into one of dawning horror. Sir? Udan said, frowning. Are you feeling okay? No, Naruto said. I feel like this dream has turned into a nightmare. Weakly, Udan chuckled. You have an amusing sense of humor as ever, sir, he said deferentially. But really, we must get a start on these forms. Mizukage-sama is requesting a Kage summit to discuss the increase of pirate activity in Mizu no Kuni's waters, and Kazekage-sama wants to adjust tariffs on imported goods. In addition, the daimyo has commissioned an A-rank mission to guard his nephew at an upcoming marriage interview with the daughter of the Land of Snow's daimyo, and the Land of Waves wants to renegotiate some old trade agreements. Also, your daughter's academy instructors want to talk to you about the possibility of early graduation. I know where you normally stand on this matter, but they are quite insistent that she would have nothing to gain from another year of schooling. I honestly think there might be some merit to the idea. Naruto was stock still for a moment as all of this sank in. He stared blankly at Udan, and his jaw slowly dipped lower and lower as the bespectacled shinobi continued to read off a mental itinerary. Oh, hell. What was all this? Is that my work for the week? Naruto inquired with a pale face and nervous expression. The week? Udan quizzically parroted. This is just the stuff that's piled up since this morning. Naruto let out a sound that was unequivocally the least manly noise this body had produced since the last time the Hokage's personal physician had ordered him to cut back on his sodium intake. Specifically, by cutting ramen out of his diet. Permanently. The tearful, shameless whining and begging that had filled the doctor's office on that day was almost as pitiful as the noise that now escaped him. I think I'm gonna go on vacation, Naruto whimpered, turning to head for the door. He didn't get to make more than a single step before freezing up. And just where do you think you're going, Nanadame-san? This voice reached Naruto's ears. He did not recognize the speaker, but the tone was enough to send a dagger of ice shooting through his gut. Against his will, Naruto turned around and came face to face with a darkly glowering, goateed and ponytailed man. Despite years of stress lining the man's face around the mouth and eyes, and the unfamiliar facial hair, Naruto found himself immediately knowing who this person was. The resemblance was that strong. Shikamaru? He gaped. With a twitching eye and veins throbbing in his temple, the man was a truly frightful sight. And while Shikamaru wasn't exactly looking serene to begin with, he was much calmer outwardly than he was on the inside. Even Naruto was perceptive enough to see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Even Naruto could see this much. The blonde gulped. Shikamaru smiled, except something about the gesture felt more like the naked baring of teeth. A thinly veiled threat. Naruto, Shikamaru said slowly, I know you like to act childish sometimes, but usually you at least know to become an adult when it's time to work. No one wants to deal with responsibility, but as men we have to grin and bear it. So you had better have a very good excuse for taking so long to come in. Naruto whimpered in spite of himself. He was rooted to the spot. It felt like his feet were nailed to the floor, only without any of the obvious pain that would come with that. I didn't know I was supposed to come? He said weakly. Shikamaru glared. Normally, Naruto, I'd let you off the hook for something like this, he said slowly. You're usually a pretty reliable guy, and I can accept that your job is even more demanding than mine in some ways, so naturally there'll be times when you want to sleep in or take the day off. Heaven knows I don't hesitate to do as much when I think I can get away with it. Shikamaru shook his head, a vein throbbing harder. But how old do you think you are? He asked, the question clearly rhetorical. You're an adult, Naruto. If you're going to come in late, then use your telephone to call and let us know. Quick question. Naruto interjected, his hand shooting up into the air. What's a telephone? For a moment, Shikamaru stared. He twitched once, twice. Silently, menacingly, he reached behind his back and drew a razor-edged Tessen. Fast as a bolt of lightning, he snapped the fan closed and whipped it through the air, straight at Naruto's head. The blonde managed to just barely dodge on reflex, reacting before his brain had even begun to register the threat. 3 severed yellow locks of hair drifted to the floor. Wah! What the hell? Naruto yelped. Don't swing that around. You could have taken my head off, you crazy bastard. What are you talking about, Hokage-sama? Shikamaru said in an even tone. It's just a horizon. The natural thing to do when someone says something that stupid is to smack them on the head with the harisen, right? He flicked the fan out again, and Naruto again found himself ducking beneath a stroke so quickly he didn't even see what was happening. He heard the sound of steel striking wood, a sharp scraping, and cautiously looked up to see a deep, clean, horizontal gash in the door. A horizon is supposed to be harmless, Naruto protested, leaping out of the way of another swipe. It's just a folded paper fan that makes a loud noise when it hits. This thing is the exact opposite of that. Shikamaru smiled. When dealing with an idiot on the level of a Hokage, it's only natural for a garrison to be clad in iron and sharpened to a hair-splitting edge, he said. That's the minimum amount of threat needed to hammer something into your head, isn't it? He turned the fan sideways and spread it, smacking Naruto atop the head with the flat of the Tessen. You dodged all the dangerous swings, after all, Shikamaru said, smiling more genuinely now. He looked calmer, less annoyed and ready to strangle his boss for breathing too loudly. Naruto's sweat dropped. So you're admitting it's dangerous? He muttered. Oh, don't make a fuss, Shikamaru said dismissively, putting the fan away. If that was all it took to harm you, you would have never made the cut for Hokage. So quit complaining and let's get to work, okay? You're not a kid anymore. I'm not the one who was bitching, Naruto snapped. And even if this is a dream, I'm still. He paused. Wait. Naruto dimly raised a hand to rub the crown of his head. I felt that, he said slowly, his eyes widening infinitesimally. Even if it wasn't very painful, it still hurt, but that can't be right. Dreams aren't supposed to hurt, are they? Hokage-sama? Said Udan, standing by the door. What are you talking about? Why do you keep saying dream this and dream that? Did you hit your head this morning? I did when this jackass hit me, Naruto peevishly muttered, jabbing a finger at Shikamaru. The goateed man snorted. So what, do you think this is all a dream or something, Naruto? He deadpanned. Isn't it? Naruto frustratedly replied, throwing his hands up in the air. Shikamaru stared at Naruto for several long seconds. He frowned, and opened his mouth to say something. But he was interrupted by the door flying wide open, Moegi bursting into the room. Shikamaru-sama! Shikamaru-sama! She breathlessly exclaimed. We have a situation. Sasuke-san and Sakura-san are. Sasuke and Sakura walked into the office behind her. The former was trying and failing to affect a stoic demeanor, while the latter did not even try to hide her horror. Both stared at Naruto, recognizing him immediately despite his aged-up appearance. Oh god, this really is a bad future, isn't it? Sasuke said, his face paling. Is that idiot seriously the Hokage? On the one hand, I'm married to Sasuke-kun, Sakura whispered. But on the other hand, Naruto is the Hokage. She shuddered. Naruto brightened immediately, completely failing to read the mood, and leaped over to Sakura. Sakura-chan! He cheered, throwing his arms wide. Wanna go on a date? She punched him in the face. EW! No way! Sakura protested. I'm married to Sasuke-kun, now! Several things happened at once then. Firstly, Sakura's body channeled chakra into her fist, as much chakra as it could muster, and released it all at once at the moment of impact. With her chakra reserves as small as they were, this punch was only a fraction of its potential strength, and the amount of chakra it expelled was enough to leave the girl woozy. Secondly, while Sakura's punch was only at a fraction of its usual power, this was still more than enough to send Naruto flying across the room with a broken nose, fighting blood into the air. He crashed into his desk and tipped it over, sending the papers flying everywhere at once. Naruto went out like a light. Thirdly, Bolt and Sarada had in fact been in the process of bringing a bleary-eyed Hinata to the Hokage's office when Naruto threw himself at Sakura, and in response to the blonde's cry, Hinata slumped into a black gloom. She became instantly despondent, and refused to react to any jostling or jolting on her carrier's parts. Her soul looked ready to leak out of her mouth, and all color had evacuated from her face. Fourthly, Shikamaru, with this new influx of information brought by Sasuke and Sakura's behavior and comments, along with his pre-existing knowledge of the various time-travel jutsu Naruto had sealed away in the Forbidden Scroll, had enough data and context to add the values up and come to a conclusion. He stared around the room at the bloody, insensate Nanadame, the wobbling, dizzy chief medic, the visibly perturbed Sasuke, the gloomy Hinata, and the guilty looks on Bolt and Sarada's faces. A vein throbbed in his forehead. Oy vey, he sighed. Boruto. Sarada. Exactly what did you two do to your parents? The teens' backs went ramrod straight, and they froze on the spot. Not just from Shikamaru's shadow possession jutsu either. Listening to the pair's nervous chuckles, Shikamaru sourly marched them into the office. The door slammed shut. Explain, Shikamaru repeated. Now. Bolt and Sarada fearfully gulped. The story tumbled out of the teens' mouths like water from a faucet, splashing all over the place in an incoherent mess. Bolt was babbling uncontrollably, and Sarada seemed to be confessing every slightest transgression she'd committed in the last 10 years. From jaywalking to copying off of classmates' homework to misfiling mission reports and neglecting to correct the errors. Shikamaru towered over the pair, seeming much taller than usual in his silent wrath. It was only natural for the Hokage's right-hand man to be on the imposing side, whether physically or psychologically, and Shikamaru's shadow Buddha Nara was no exception. Even the son and favorite successor of the Hokage, Boruto and Sarada respectively, were not immune to retribution from the man they called the century's greatest strategist. Yammering anxiously away, they spilled the beans in a tangled jumble of words, talking over one another and bouncing back and forth in tense, setting, voice, and tone. It was all over the place, and most people wouldn't have been able to make heads or tails of the panicked confession. But Shikamaru quietly listened with his arms folded over his chest, eyes closed, nodding to himself once or twice as the picture unfolded in his mind. He sorted through the story as it was told, analyzing the account on multiple levels simultaneously as they told it. Finally, he had enough to go on and raised a hand up, holding it palm outward to silence the pair. Okay, he said, sighing long-sufferingly. That's enough. I think I got the picture. Shaking his head, Shikamaru looked from Sakura, who was leaning against Sasuke, to Sasuke, who was blushing and trying to gingerly shift Sakura off of him, to Hinata, who was moping beside a sympathetic-looking Moegi, to Naruto, whose broken nose was being tended to by Udon. Then he let his gaze fall on Sarada and Bolt. A vein throbbed in his forehead, and his left eye twitched. If you two weren't who you are, Shikamaru said slowly, dangerously, I'd have you arrested on the spot for tampering with the Forbidden Scroll and performing an outlawed kenjutsu. Some villages would consider that sufficient grounds for charges of high treason. Bolt and Sarada nervously gulped. Considering the circumstances, however, I know better, Shikamaru added, continuing on. He gave both teens a penetrating glance. You kids are both special cases, in a sense loath as I am to admit it, we can't just execute you or put you in the stocks for this. Mostly because Hokage-sama has outlawed or heavily regulated most of the more barbaric forms of punishment you might have earned with a stunt like this in the past, but also partly because of your relationships to him. Either as his son, or one of his personally favored choices for succession. For a moment, Bolt and Sarada looked like they were about to breathe a sigh of relief. Shikamaru smirked. So instead I'll leave the bulk of your punishment up to your parents, once they get back. His eyes gleamed with an almost sadistic pleasure, seeing the immediate, terrified reaction this statement elicited from the kids. And make no mistake, they will get back. Oh, of course, Shikamaru, Boruto stammered. We'll help reverse the jutsu, of course. Right. Sarada yelped. We'll do whatever it takes to get them back. Shikamaru nodded. I know, he said. And you'll be wearing these until they get back. With a gesture of his hand, a tendril of shadow appeared pulling something out of a closet in the office. The Kagyoshi tentacle twisted around to reveal its load to the two teens. Bolt and Sarada stared. Two gaudy signboards reading "We will not mess around with forbidden jutsu" were dangled in front of their faces. Bold, colorful, traffic cone orange was the color of the boards, and the lettering was done in sharp, glossy black. The colors alone made it clear this was something the Nanodame had personally made. Paling significantly, the teens nervously swallowed. Shikamaru afforded them a cold smile. Now put them on and get to work, he said. Why, yes, sir. Bolt and Sarada squeaked, snapping off fearful salutes. They took the proffered boards and draped them over their torsos. But after doing this, they hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to proceed next. I assume you have notes on the jutsu? Shikamaru said. Yeah, Bolt replied. But I gave them to Sarada last night. What did you do with them? He turned and asked her. Sarada flushed. They're at my house, she answered. Go get them, then, Shikamaru said. Both of you. Udon can go with, once he's done treating Lord Naruto. He caught himself at the last moment, making a mental note to call up Kakashi and ask him a favor. The teens gaped. But that's halfway across town, Sarada squeaked. She looked down at the signboard she and Boruto had been forced to don, anxiously fiddling with one of the straps over her shoulders. Her face was beet red, and her eyes as wide as dinner plates. Shikamaru was unmoved. This is part of your punishment, he coolly replied. Maybe a healthy dose of public humiliation will make you kids think twice the next time you consider messing with kenjutsu. Bolt and Sarada blushed and gulped. Of course, Shikamaru-san, they said. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes. That's sama to you. Why yes, Shikamaru-sama, they squealed. Thanks for watching, Shinobi Squad. If you enjoyed this what if, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop your theories in the comments, I'm always reading. Want more Naruto heat? Check out the other videos on the channel. Stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember even shadow clones need love. Peace out, Shinobi!